What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto Reincarnation of Vergil? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The first thing he noticed upon his return to the realm of consciousness was the stench of sulfur and brimstone accompanied by an unnatural heat. Unfamiliar settings and somewhat disturbing considering that he felt like he belonged to this place, wherever it was, but he simply had no idea why that was. Bleary eyes slowly opened only to widen at the first glance of his surroundings. Red skies as far as the eyes could see, but what was more eye-catching was the shape of the sun. Instead of the bright star of yellow sunshine and energy, made out of combusting gas and flames, he was greeted with an anomaly. A great big black sphere blocking the rays of the sun. A permanent eclipse hiding the rays of the big ball of gas. Looking around some more showed even stranger occurrences. Floating islands and rocks, seemingly defying gravity, and random spouts of fire and magma. It was all surreal, and enough to clue him into the fact that he was definitely nowhere near the human world. In fact, there was only place that matched such description. Hell, also known by many names such as Makai, Jigokudo, the underworld, but most importantly, the demon world. The place where the souls of the condemned and guilty that departed the human realm reside. The birthplace of demons and devils. But, why am I here? The last memories he had, were of battling alongside his brother to vanquish that human-turned-demon who thought he could control him. After putting the final nail in his coffin, via bullets from his idiotic brother's favorite gun, Ebony, he remembered seeking his father's blade. Only to be stalled by said brother, which ended with them crossing blades once more. Not only that, but he had actually lost. Against his idiotic, irresponsible, clown of a brother. He had lost to him in a duel of swordsmanship. He was always the stronger of the two, always managing to pull victories against his vulgar brother, and yet, when it mattered, it seemed his resolve was weaker than that of his brother's. So much for his self-chosen motto. Might controls everything, and without strength you cannot protect anything, let alone yourself. He had told his foolish brother, thinking that he was leagues above him. Believing that since he was born with more talent, more strength, more speed, that he was the better twin. That it was his destiny to shape the world with the power gained from his father's blade. But he had still lost. He was defeated. He was banished. On that note, a vein pulsed. His head throbbed with pain as flashes crossed through his mind. Memories, not of his own yet he was the person living in them, flashed through his eyes. Falling to darkness, only to see three sources of light. A shade in the darkness, took him, robbed him of everything that he was. Controlled him, and molded him into something he was, but at the same time he wasn't. Then he was suddenly consumed by darkness. Mundus. He had met him. His fall into Makai had left him in the clutches of the king of hell. And he was powerless against him. There was nothing he could do. Until, a castle blurred into his mind. Images of his brother, older, more experienced, stronger, were next to show themselves. A fight. Sparks from crossing blades. He lost again. This time, instead of humiliation, he felt pride. Instead of rage, he felt content. Instead of despair, he felt joy, and a hint of retribution. Even with the demon lord's power boosting his own, his brother's resolve prevailed. That tenacity of his actually proved useful. Not only that, but Dante had gone forth and confronted the demon lord himself. And from the way he had been released of the spell placed on him, it seemed like his foolish brother had defeated Mundus once and for all. And with him defeated, he was free once more. He was once again Virgil. But, what to do now? Where would he go? What would he do? He had nothing to live for. No ambition, no goal, no purpose. He doubted that Dante would simply welcome him back into his life 9 years after the last they met, not counting their encounters when he was Nello Angelo, since he had been trying to destroy the world that Dante seemed to favor. Not to say that he would go back to his brother. Even though he had accepted the fact that Dante was stronger than he was, that didn't mean he would go crawling back to him. He still had his pride to consider. He could go back to roaming the earth like he did before meeting Arkham, but what was there to do? He had already seen plenty, slayed his fair share of demons, and enjoyed the pleasures that humans seemed to hold in high regards. Fast vehicles, women, money, and all sorts of precious items of the like held none of his fancy. They were momentary pleasures, and certainly nothing that he would spend 2 seconds of thought into. No, He needed something else, something more, something new. A shadow covered flew over him in that moment, as though answering his thought. It grabbed his attention, reeling him in. Well, that is something to do for now, he thought before racing after the dark figure. To think that such an event would happen. For the Dark Emperor to lose once more against a foe with the blood of the accursed Sparta. It was unbelievable, inconceivable, impossible, yet, it had actually happened. There was no doubt about it. Unlike the last time Mundus had been defeated by Sparta, there was no coming back for the Demon Prince. He was not sealed this time, nor was he simply pushed aside. No, the red-themed son of Sparta had literally torn Mundus to pieces. Chipped at his godly figure until he had revealed his true form, which he had then annihilated to the point of no return. The Demon Prince's reign would finally reach its end, and he wanted to have nothing to do with it. He was one of the Dark Lord's generals, but he knew that he was no match for some of the others, who would fight tooth and nail over the control of hell. Of those, the one most likely to rule after the prince would be Argisax. His power level was always just shy of the Demon Prince's own. The beast would also be a viable match, if he wanted, which was quite unlikely. That being's existence seemed quite useless in the grand scheme of things. So much power, wasted. He never liked the beast. Known to be one of the most terrifying and destructive creature in the history of devils, and to not make use of it. He definitely didn't stand the sight of him. But there was nothing he could do to a being that was beyond him so in power. Next was the traitor Sparta. He had no intention to bother with the dead knight. Not that he would ever choose to take up the mantle of ruler of hell. Sparta always believed he was above those of the species he belonged to. And now he's the one 6 feet underground. How humorous, he internally chuckled. Abigail would also be one of those savages to try and take the throne. The self-proclaimed, bladed devil, and world destroyer, would certainly try his hand against his fellow generals. And most likely meet his end. Not that he would shed any tears at his destruction. No, he certainly would not mourn any of them. If it was up to him, he would sit back and watch while his entire species fought each other till none of them remained. It made no difference to him. Finally, on the list of possible successors was him. Known as the one-eyed demon god, the calamity bringer. His name was Datara. He was one of the oldest and had lived for several centuries, which helped him become one of the top brass in the demon world. Few could withstand his mere presence, and even less would be able to actually battle him. Even amongst the class of giant demons, he stood at the top of such hierarchy. His power through his years of existence only grew with his size. His full size covered entire mountains and spread terror into the hearts of the demons of Makai. His most defining feature, the feature that granted him his name, was his single cyclopean tomo blood-red eye. His signature motif, if he had any. His muscled frame also helped in crushing any foe that dared stand in his way. Horns extended from his face, 2 from the center of his forehead and curved inwards, which assisted him in casting his beam spells and destructive energy spheres. Long bat ears on the top of his head next to his horns, and a maw filled with sharp teeth meant to tear the flesh of his enemies and consume them. But his most recognizable feature, and one of the sources of his immense strength, were the 10 massive reptilian tails that extended from his lower back and spread into the blood-red sky. With a single flick, nature itself would bend to his will as he brought utter destruction with his mere presence. The rest of the Mundus generals were small fry, nowhere near as powerful as his chosen elite. And significantly useless and weak. Prime example being Griffin and Phantom, the 2 demons that were sent to kill the son of Sparta, only to fall short and die rather uselessly. Then again, they were quite idiotic to underestimate the power of the Devil Slayer. After all, he did have the blood of the deceased Dark Knight himself, regardless of the fact that he was half human. And they paid the price, no doubt about it, he thought. And now there was nothing to be done. The demon world will go through a time of strife. Even now, the effects of the battle between the Demon Prince and Dante reverberated all around him. The power released in their battle had literally shook the foundation of hell itself. The air felt heavy, the earth grew hotter and the skies darkened. Volcanoes erupted, sweeping through the lands of hell. These occurrences would do nothing to a demon of his caliber, however, the souls of lower demons will suffer, for there was no escape for them. This was his K to go. And he knew exactly where to go to. For he had information few beside him knew of. Not even the demon prince knew of. The truth was, he had kept it hidden from the demon prince for the simple fact that he wanted this secret to be his own personal playground. As a demon, and with his status, he was entitled to have his own secrets. Although, he suspected that some of the other ancient devils knew. That beast certainly hinted as much to him. The truth that he had kept to himself was the existence of other human worlds. The same way that hell was connected to the human world where Sparta had escaped, there were also other gateways that lead to different locations. It did not make much difference when you thought about it, however it meant a single fact. Mundus certainly did not need to confront the realm where the son of Sparta resided. He could have simply gained control over any of the realms and gathered his armies and strength before engaging the traitor's son. A moot point now, but it did not matter. Now however, this will prove handy for Datara. For he had no need to stay in hell, and be forced once more to follow those worthless devils. For why would he choose to serve someone in hell, when he could rule his own world? Yes, that sounds much more to my liking, he chuckled maliciously. A world where he was the strongest entity. Where no one would dare oppose him. Where he was free to destroy and consume souls to his heart's desire. And it was a simple hell gate away. His eyes glinted as the hell gate shined, as though sensing the coming calamity. A bright light, and he was no more. Never noticing the tiny in comparison figure that seemed to follow in his steps through the gate, mere moments later. For the second time in a short while, Virgil found himself in strange surroundings. Unlike the last place however, it seemed he had hit what his brother would call a jackpot. Tall mountains stood at the distance, covered in green trees. The sky was colored a clear and pure blue unlike the blood red of before. Woodland animals scurried around as he stood in front of the giant stone wall of the Hell Gate. The air felt clean and light, with a hint of moist as a slight mist settled in the area, that did nothing to cover the land's beauty. This place was the exact opposite of the hellish view he was in. As loath as he was to admit it, but the atmosphere was strong enough to affect him. His body felt relaxed, as though a huge weight had been removed off his chest. No longer was his body tense and ready for combat, but it had relaxed with a single breath from the surrounding area. It was far too peaceful to be tense in such a beautiful place. He took a few minutes of relaxation, before releasing the breath he held within. There was still a demon to be taken care. With that thought in mind, his left gloved hand clenched, tight enough that his bones creaked. After all, for the very first time in his life, he felt the absence of a familiar weight from his hand or attached to his waist. For the first time since he could remember, he was unarmed. Yamato was no longer with him. His trusted sword, the weapon no, it was much more than a simple weapon. It was a treasure, entrusted to him by his father, so that he can protect himself and his family. So that he may use it against the demons that would threaten Sparta's legacy. His mother, his brother, himself, and he had lost it. During the battle which he lost against the demon lord, Mundus, his weapon had been shattered. Destroyed. Lost. He himself, beaten and enslaved. Truly, there was no end to his failures it seemed. No, that is all in the past. He resolved. He may have failed to protect his mother. He may have failed to rise to the expectations of his father. He may have failed to be a brother to his own twin. But not anymore. From now on, things will change. He said. Looking up at the sky, he continued, I will make you proud father, mother. Determination filled his entire being as he took a single step forward, simultaneously as a distant roar shook the entire earth around him. Several years later, so what will you do now? One of the three figures asked. The three of them were standing on a giant spire. A remnant of their battle with the great demon. Their battle had been long and arduous, spanning multiple days and night. However, at last they had been able to fell the giant beast. Jubi, Datara, father. These were some of the titles that belonged to the giant beast. The last being the title that two of the three addressed the giant beast with. The first figure, the one who spoke, was a tall and pale-skinned man. He had spiky, shoulder-length, pale brown hair, with a chin-length, braided lock hanging in front of his left ear. He also sported a short goatee. He also had a pair of horn-like protrusions extending from either side of his forehead and pupil-less white eyes that would change as he used his dojutsu. He also had a red mark in the center of his forehead, similar to a third eye. He wore a white, full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around a high collar, beneath which, He wore a necklace which was also made up of 6 black magatama. On the back of his kimono was a larger, black circular marking with a pattern of 9 magatama arranged in 3 rows of 3 beneath it. He was Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the elder son of the priestess, Kagaya Otsutsuki, and the recently christened Jinchuriki of the chakra of the Jubi. I don't know yet. All this time that I have been here, all I could think of was defeating this one demon. I never thought what to do after, answered the second figure. Time had done very little to change his basic appearance. He still sported his swordsman's gloved, royal blue trench coat and spiky white hair. The only difference anyone could see about him was that he had matured slightly in his years in this realm. Even though it had been about 30 years since his arrival to this world, he hadn't aged as much as it would seem. He theorized it had to do with the fact that he didn't belong to this world, and so, he didn't age accordingly. Then again, it could be something related to his rebirth as Nello Angelo, and gaining more demonic power this he was naturally born with. He could defiantly feel a difference whenever he would access his devil trigger power, but there was no concrete evidence to suggest such. Regardless, it didn't matter much to him. He would take whatever life would give him now. That was the promise he had made himself a long time ago. As he stood there he marveled at the beauty of the world around him. Even scarred and damaged from their recent battle with the demon, the setting sun painted a beautiful work of art, as his hand rested on his new sword courtesy of his newfound ally. Well, we know you are not originally from our world, but you're free to stay. You have more than earned your place among us, regardless of what you are, replied the third figure, with Hagoromo nodding alongside him. The third figure was actually similar in appearance to the first, which wasn't truly surprising considering the two were brother. Hamura Otsutsuki was the younger brother of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, and the youngest son of Kagaya. Hamura was a tall and pale-skinned man with hairless brow ridges and short white hair. His bangs were short hung to left side of his face with a chin-length lock which hung from the right side of his face. He also had a small, horn-like protrusions on his forehead and pale white eyes, that according to him contained another of the so-called dojutsu. He wore a light, full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around a high collar and dark pants. He had his sword in its sheath strapped to his left hip. After he had first arrived into this world, he had realized that he was severely weakened. After regaining control after Munda's defeat, he had to lay low for a while until he was strong enough to be in shape for combat once more. Once he had regained his strength, he had sought out the demon Datara. After several battles with the demon, it appeared as though their powers were equal. They had battled many times after that with no clear victor, with one side barely escaping death every single time. It took many years later before he was approached by the brothers. The brothers who were themselves, half demon half human. It seemed that their mother, Kagaya, had been an unwilling sacrifice, in a previous attempt to appease Datara. And in a sadistic twist of events, instead of consuming her and killing her, Datara had decided to take the woman. As a result, the first 2 half-demons in front of him were born. Having known the truth, the two decided that it was up to them to end the rule of the demon over their land. And so, they had sought out the Dark Slayer, the only warrior to have ever stood against their progenitor. Virgil himself. The second he had met up with them, Virgil was struck by how cruel fate could be. To him, the sight of 2 brothers united for a common goal brought him back to all the times he was with his own brother as children. He saw in them what he himself could have been, and what he had missed out on if he had been less prideful and more cooperative with Dante. It didn't take him too long to agree to join forces with the 2 brothers. As a sign of good faith, he had even gained his new sword from them. A sword created with the weird power these 2 brothers seemed to wield. Chakra is what they called. Hagoromo seemed to create the sword for him, using his own chakra and reinforced with the special ore the land itself manifested. And that was how he gained one of the 3 imperial regalia, the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Hagoromo then granted his brother, Hamura, with the Yata no Kagami, which was a gauntlet that covered his off arm, and was able to block any attack that afflicted it, and the second of the 3 imperial regalia, treasures. As it was too bulky, Hamura kept it in its sealed form, which looked like an intricate wristguard. The final piece was the Yasukani no Magatama, the Magatama necklace that Hagoromo seemed to never take off. If that is quite alright with you, then I would like to stay here a while longer. I do admit that I am entrapped by this country, replied Virgil. Not like I have anywhere else to go yet. He thought. One of the many casualties of their battle was the Hell Gate he had used to cross over to their world. And he had no idea where to go. Furthermore, there was something else. He had a feeling that he wasn't meant to leave just yet. There was still something else he was supposed to do. And if there is one thing I've learned, is that I should really trust such weird gut feelings, as Dante would call them. He thought. A hand on his shoulder drew his attention to the smiling visage of his colleagues. We owe you for fighting our battles on our behalf. The debt we have will not be repaid so easily. Please, consider yourself at home, replied Hagoromo. Welcome to our Ninshu, Virgil Dono. A few days passed since the battle between Virgil, the Otsutsuki brother, and the fearsome demon, Jubi. The battle that had ended with the sealing of the Jubi's chakra and power into his eldest son, Hagoromo, while his body was contained and sealed into the sphere that would later become the moon itself. Virgil had protested such an action, stating that seals, no matter how powerful they were, eventually would break. That if it was up to him, he would permanently end Dotara's life once and for all. They however countered by saying that this was their way of providing their world the power to defend themselves. For their world had grown too dangerous for normal beings. In the time period where Dotara had ruled, demons had infested their earth. With the control he had over their world, he had managed to draw his demonic followers into their land. Now, demons roamed the earth, attacking and destroying villages and tainting the earth with the blood of its inhabitants. Even worse, was the existence of the world-ending tree, that was summoned with Dotara's power. Virgil had claimed its name to be the Qliphothe, a poisonous tree, that connected the demon world to any human realm it was summoned into, creating a temporary portal that allowed demons free passage into the earth. The brothers, however, had already dubbed the giant tree, Shinju, the world-ending god tree. Dotara had been attempting to cultivate the entire population of the earth to empower his Qliphothe into producing its fruit, something that Virgil knew he had to prevent from happening. After defeating Dotara, it had been a much simpler task between the three of them: cut down the tree and destroy it. Virgil knew, however, that simply cutting down the tree wasn't enough. The tree's roots had already sunk into the earth. It would return one day, whether at the empowerment of a different demon or on its own, after consuming enough human or even demon blood, to finish what it had started. The tree might not be sentient, however it had yet to bear its fruit. It would take a while, but eventually, it would mark the return of Makai into the world of Ninshu. It was part of the reason he had decided to stay and make this world his own. The other was due to an event he had never thought possible. He had been accepted. Him, the half-devil son of Sparta, had earned the acceptance of the people of Ninshu. They had invited him into their homes, adopted him into their society, and even had wed him to one of their own. Virgil couldn't believe that he, the one called the Alpha and the Omega, the Black Angel, had been tamed into becoming a family man. It was a good thing that Dante was nowhere near where he was the moment, since he was sure he would never hear the end of it from him. He had conceded, accepted it, and decided that this was his way to gain redemption for his past transgressions. He was now Virgil Minamoto. Several hundred years had passed since the battle between the Otsutsuki brothers, their patriarch and the son of Sparta. After the defeat of the demon, lesser demon occurrences had become much far between, as they seemed to hide their existence from the half-humans who had defeated their strongest representative. Over the course of the years, humanity began to advance, and chakra had spread far and wide. Now it seemed that the entire civilian population had gained the ability to manipulate their chakra. At least half of the world's population had been able to harness and use their chakra, with the other simply being able to live with its existence within, but unable to manipulate it. The most prominent of chakra users were those who belonged to the same clans. The major clans in the world realized that their chakra seemed to grow potent with each generation. As such, it became part of their tradition to train their younglings in the mystic arts, and manipulate their breeding in a way to further their power. With them harnessing the power of their chakra, they became soldiers of fortune. Mercenaries for hire to the highest bidder. This was the beginning of the conflict between the population of the world of Ninshu. Fame, gold and power became the driving source for the human beings. Many years of such conflicts lead to the end of the era of the Ninshu, and the birth of shinobi and their ninjutsu. The name of the great sage, the teacher and founder of Ninshu, died and lay forgotten as the perverted version of it. Ninjutsu prevailed all over the earth. Shinobi began using the energy source to fuel their techniques, and using them against their fellow human beings. And so began the era of the warring clans, and the era of the Rikudo Sennin was banished and forgotten. This continued until one man, from of the most prominent clans of the time, managed to convince his counterpart from a rival clan to stop their fighting. They decided that the bloodshed had to end once and for all. And so, they created the first hidden village. A village meant to act a symbol of unity and peace, and an end to the warring of their clans. Thus, Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves, was born. The two men who had changed their world were Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, two of the strongest and well-known shinobi of their clans. With the birth of that village, other clans also decided to do the same, and thus began the race to establish their own hidden villages, until there existed the top 5. Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves, located in the land of fire, led by the holder of the Hokage title. Kirigakure, the village hidden in the mist, located in the land of water, led by the holder of the Mizukage title. Sanagakure, the village hidden in the sand, located in the land of wind, led by the holder of the Kazekage title. Kumogakure, the village hidden in the clouds, located in the land of lightning, led by the holder of the Raikage title. And finally, Iwagakure, the village hidden in the stones, located in the land of earth, led by the holder of the Tsuchikage title. Many more villages were formed, but as they had none of the major clans as their founders, they fell below the standard of the major villages, and are not considered to be a part of the major hidden villages. As so began the era of the 5 great elemental nations. Within some of those villages, very special individuals resided. 9 were granted a responsibility greater than even the one granted to the cages of their villages, and for one of those individuals, their life would experience a major twist. Konoha present day. Life was never easy for 7-year-old orphaned Naruto Uzumaki. Having finished his academy lessons for the day, he was on his way back to his apartment. Today, just like most other days, had been spent trying to keep up with the progress of the other students in his class, which was made somewhat difficult due to the constant mistreatment he would have to endure. Teachers never bothered to help him in particular, usually doing their bare minimum to help, and only when the class was learning as a group, and never sparing him a glance during individual lessons. Some teachers had even went a step over that, showing clear hostility and hatred, sneering his way during lessons. Even the students seemed to pick up on this treatment from the academy teachers, and just like the children they tried to copy and imitate them and treated him the same way. That is, if they hadn't been treating him that way from the beginning even before entering the academy. For some reason he couldn't fathom, he was never liked in the village either. Everyone seemed to hold something against him, which was why he never had any friends. He had to deal with the regular bullying here and there in the academy, and after study ended, but they quickly learned that regardless of his small size, his fists packed quite a punch. He was never the one to initiate the first punch, but he made sure to have the last one. Until they learned that simply size didn't matter and resorted to use quantity over quality. Whereas he would usually have to deal with 1 or 2, recently he had been dealing with up to 5 students. These days he would simply have to drag his scuffed, slightly bruised body back to his apartment, and rest until the next day, when somehow, all of his injuries seemed to heal. His bullies, however, had to deal with their own wounds for the days to come, which was another thing that never truly added to his popularity. "Hello there, Naruto-kun. How was your day today?" The familiar voice pulled him out of his thoughts. While he was walking, he turned to see one of the very few who actually seemed to care about his well-being in the whole village. "Hokage Gigi, what are you doing here?" exclaimed Naruto. He was happy to see the old man, but was also surprised since he knew he was usually too busy to visit him during the day. The old man chuckled half-heartedly, before opening his arms and pulling Naruto into a short hug. He was wearing the official uniform of a Hokage, which consisted of the customary hat and haori with a red, full-length kimono that was tied with a white sash. His old age seemed obvious, as his skin was marred with wrinkles and liver spots to go along with what few gray hairs that could be seen under the hat. "Well, I thought I'd surprise you today, and spend some time with my favorite grandson. Why don't you want to spend some time with an old geezer like me?" he teased. No, that's not what I meant. I just thought that you were busy with work, and I don't want to keep you away from it," replied Naruto. He was always happy when the old man would come visit him at the apartment every now and then, but he knew the man had bigger things to take care of than look after him. He was after the third Hokage of the village, Hiruzen Sarutobi. The old man hummed as he looked at his young ward. He took a quick glance and noticed his other parents seemed to watch and linger on their conversation, throwing glares at the boy, and whispering to each other. A quick sharp in their direction had them all scurry off, dragging their tired children behind them. The man gave a short sigh, before turning to young Naruto and offering him a smile. "It's quite all right, my boy. I managed to get done with my work a little early today and decided to check up on you. It's been a while since I've seen you. Why don't we go have some lunch and you can tell me all about day, he encouraged. At the mention of food, Naruto's stomach decided to announce itself with a gurgle. Chuckling sheepishly, Naruto scratched the back of his head, a move that brought a sting of pain into the old man's heart. He remembered a similar red-haired girl with a round face with the same exact habit. Naruto smiled, one of his rare honest smiles, and nodded. Minutes later, the two arrived at the blonde's favorite restaurant, and the place where they usually have these meals of theirs. A small wooden booth, with white flaps, with the name, Ramen Ichiraku. It was a modest restaurant that at a glance, can be simply ignored or regarded as street food. However, for Naruto this place was a second home. For him, while the food was a good reason to visit the establishment, the people were the cause of his true happiness. For the booth was owned by two more people who seemed to actually care for his well-being. A father and daughter combo, Tuchi and Ayame Ichiraku. "Konnichiwa Ji-san, Ayame-chan," called out Naruto, as he slipped into the booth and sat on one of the seats, with Hiruzen behind, ducking under the flaps himself. "Oh Naruto, konnichiwa. Hokage-sama, you honor us with your visit." The chef greeted and bowed to the leader of the village. "Ah, Tuchi-san, it is good to see you are in good health. How is the booth? Business going well? As well as it can be, Hokage-sama, thank you for your concern." Tuchi replied with a smile. He then turned to the young boy and said, "How about you, Naruto-kun? How is the academy going?" "It's going okay, I guess." The boy shrugged. "But that's not important right now. Where is Ayame-chan?" he asked, excitedly looking around for his surrogate sister figure. The old man smiled at the young boy. "I'm afraid she went out to do some shopping with a few friends," he replied, and laughed at the face the young boy did. Mentioning the word shopping seemed to be the equivalent of a baby sucking on an extra sour lemon. While he prepared his utensils for his customers, he asked, "So what will you be having today?" "One vegetable ramen for me if you will," replied Hiruzen. "I'll have one miso ramen and one beef." "Coming right up," smiled Tuchi. The rest of the day was mostly spent by Hiruzen trying to convince Naruto to slow down while eating, until he eventually gave up and continued to converse with Naruto. Meanwhile, Naruto did his best to keep the conversation going, jumping between topics and trying to savor every moment he could. It was rare for him to spend time with his favorite people, as he would only meet them a few times a month, if not every other month. Time passed far too quick in his opinion that day. Ayame had returned at some point during his stay. She had been exhausted from her time with her friends, so she barely had enough time to greet him, giving him a quick hug before apologizing and retreating to the first floor of the restaurant, where the Ichirakus lived. Not long after that, he was taken home by the Hokage, who had promised to pass by again sometime soon. He offered the old man a smile and a bow before thanking him for the meal, and retreating to his apartment. He was sad that the day had to end, but he was also used to it. He had lived his entire life alone, never having any family or friends to take care of him. No one there to pick him up after his day at the academy ended. No one present to welcome him home after a long day, or fill the apartment with the warm smell of a home-cooked meal. He never truly had any of those things. The Hokage was special to him, yes, but at the end of the day, he was more a close older friend than an actual grandfather to him, as the man liked to refer to himself. It was like he had simply existed, and someone had forgotten to add these details to his life manual. Even though he sometimes played the part of the fool, he was anything but. He always saw the weird glances that people would throw his way, and sometimes he could pick up a few words of their whispers. They were always harsh words, and sometimes words that he himself didn't understand. He might not be one of the smartest people in the world, but he wasn't by any means slow. Even he could see how some people would throw glances at the Ichiraku booth, regardless if he was there or not, and he had a feeling it was because of him. Both Tucci and Ayame were always nice and welcoming to him, but he also knew that their restaurant was the only thing they had. He didn't want them to end up being hurt because of him, whether it be physically or financially, which is why he would only visit them every once in a while, usually once a week if not less. He never understood why he was treated this way, but he had a few theories. He once theorized that maybe it was because of his parents. Maybe they had done something that was very bad and people knew about it. Or maybe it was him. Maybe he himself was cursed. Perhaps that would explain why his parents had left him. After all, very few people could boast to be born on the day that he was. October 10th. It was an important date that even he himself couldn't ignore. It was after all the day of the Kyuubi festival. The one festival throughout the year where Naruto would feel so uncomfortable that he would simply stay in his apartment the whole day, or find himself a nice training field and waste the day away training until the end of the festival. The glares on that specific day were worse than ever. He never understood why it was. What kind of connection did he have to the demon? Was he considered a bad omen simply because he was born on that day? It would certainly explain some things, but not the rest. Like why did he have whisker mark birthmarks on his face, for example? He only wished someone would give him the answers to the questions he always had. He was so lost in thought that he didn't realize he was already ready for bed. His body had been moving on autopilot, changing into his PJs, finishing his nightly rituals, and now here was sitting in bed. He sighed before switching off his bedside lamp and laying down under the covers. Naruto had a feeling that he was missing something. Something wasn't right, but he had no idea what it was. He felt as though his current life was pulling him back and keeping him stagnant. The feeling was similar to someone having something important to do, but forgetting what it was. He only hoped that whatever it was, he would actually get to find out. And hopefully sometime soon, since it was really an annoying feeling. That was his last thought, before closing his eyes, and allowing sleep to take over. In the dream world, Naruto opened his eyes and immediately felt confused. The last thing he remembered was going to sleep in his bed. It was weird because he could think clearly. He was fully aware of his body, but he still felt nothing around him. He was floating in midair, in the middle of nowhere. All around him he could see nothing but darkness. Not the same darkness of night, but more like the darkness of being underground. Then suddenly, he could hear whispers. Looking around he still found nothing, but the noise kept increasing. He couldn't understand the words that were spoken. He was sure they were words but nothing that he had ever heard before. The whispers kept getting higher and closer, and slowly he could feel his heart beating faster and faster. Sweat began to slide down his face, and he was beginning to panic. The noises kept getting louder and louder. He had to cover his ears as they got so loud, he could feel head pounding. And then suddenly, they stopped. Slowly opening his eyes, he didn't notice when he had actually closed them. He saw the back of a man standing in front of him. He was wearing a blue coat and light brown boots. The man had fair, yet pale skin, and white, swept-back hair that made it look somewhat spiky, not much different than his own. He was motionless, simply standing there. The whispers slowly returned, but this time, they stayed just that way, whispers, as though they were terrified of the man's presence. Suddenly, the man's head began to turn. As though the entire scene was in slow motion, the moment Naruto saw one of the man's blue eyes, Naruto finally understood the word the whispers were saying. Sparda. A flash of light blinded him and he knew no more. Naruto woke up with a gasp. Looking around, he found himself back in his apartment, with the sun barely shining through the window. Breathing heavily, he did his best to slow down his beating heart. His clammy clothes that stuck to his body did nothing to calm down his racing thoughts. What was that? That felt too real to be a dream. And who was that man? He had never seen that man. The only person with that shade of hair that he knew of was a shinobi he had seen around in the village. The man wore a half mask that covered his lower, but even his hair color was a different shade. He was more gray than the white of the man he saw in his dream. In Sparta. Who was that? Was that the man's name? He had never heard that word before, not in the history lessons in the academy or around the village. It was most likely the man's title or name, since the voices seemed to react to him. So, that begged the question. Who and why did the man suddenly come up in a dream of his? Realizing that nothing was going to come out of spending his time thinking to himself, Naruto slowly slid out of his bed. He didn't have to go to the academy today since it was the weekend. He usually spent those days simply exercising in the training fields or practicing the 2 academy jutsus he could do. Since he didn't have much else to do in his everyday life, he usually spent it training his body, whether by swimming, running, climbing trees or high cliffs, if he felt bored enough, or doing strength training. He never bothered with his theoretical lessons, since he always felt that being a ninja was more physical than mental. Training his mental reflexes and common sense was usually done by his extremely handy skill in pranking. His pranking was usually only reserved for those people who deserved, usually those being extra nasty to him or intentionally pretending that he doesn't exist. Like that one time he had tried to head to the convenience store only for the cashier to not tally up his purchase, and pretended like he wasn't even there, and he ended up leaving and going home without his groceries. The next day, the cashier found himself covered in pigeon feces. He had showered at least 3 or 4 times just to get rid of the slimy substance, and had been sour-faced all week. Since Naruto was good enough with the henge jutsu, he had never faced that situation again. No one knew it was him, and that was the way he found himself able to train his stealth and strategy skills. After all, in that one prank alone, he had to sneak into the Konoha aviary, which was very close to the Hokage tower, which meant there was an abundance of Junin, Anbu and Chunin level shinobi. Slipping them and collecting the poop, then carrying it all the way and setting the trap, surprisingly helped sharpen his skills. For today, however, he felt somewhat driven. The memory of the dream felt surreal, and he was far too hyped from the adrenaline to distract himself with anything else. For once, Naruto decided that he was going to look for some answers, in the one place he would never willingly go to. The Konoha library. As loath as he was to go there, his curiosity would not be sated without information about the name, Sparta, which wasn't much to go by either way. If he found something, then so be it; if not, then he might have to ask the old man if he knew anything about it. His plan set, Naruto started preparing himself for the day. 30 minutes later, Naruto finally reached the Konoha library. The pink-colored building was located around the center of the village, and easily accessible by most members of the village. It was about 2 blocks away from the Hokage tower, making it a bit of a hike from his own apartment building, that was located on the east side of the village. Still, it wasn't too far away for a ninja, even a ninja in training like him. Taking the few steps into the building, he was greeted with the vast arrays of shelves of books that had knowledge since the creation of the village. Naturally, they included information about many subjects, such as history, gardening, chakra theory, jutsu theory and some lower-level jutsus. Nothing that would be higher than a D-rank jutsu, since as this was a public library and anyone was welcome to use the information in. Any jutsu that was a higher rank than D rank was usually stuffed in secret and protected, either by the Anbu shinobi or the clans that created them, and could only be released by chunin or higher rank shinobi. Naruto found the front desk manned by a young girl twice his age, around 13 or 14 years of age. She had average features, short black hair, and brown eyes. Her clothes indicated that she was a civilian, a pink blouse and skirt. She seemed nice, but unfortunately, most people also seem that way till they catch sight of him. Approaching the front desk slowly, Naruto cleared his throat in order to grab her attention. "Excuse me," he noticed her turning to him and continued, hi." The girl blinked at his awkward greeting, before offering a smile of her own. "Hello there. Welcome to the Konoha library, how can I help you?" He felt his confidence return at her pleasant greeting and noted how she seemed fine with him being there. "I just want to make sure if the library was open and if I can browse around. I'm looking for a name, probably something in some history books." "Yes, of course we are open. As long as you don't damage any of the books, please feel free to look for what you need. If you can tell me what you're looking for, maybe I can point you in the right direction." Well, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. I was just trying to find something about a name, Sparta." "Did you hear that name before?" The girl frowned in thought, and slowly shook her head in a negative. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid I never heard that name before. You can check the S section in the library, and you might find what you're looking for." "That would be awesome, thank you," he replied before rushing off to look. The girl seemed surprised to see him abruptly rush off, before returning back to her work. Slowly going through the bookshelves, Naruto kept looking for the S alphabet section of the library. He was pleasantly surprised at how nice the girl at the front desk, but he wasn't one to look a gift horse in the mouth, so to say. Finding the section he was looking for, Naruto strolled through the aisle, trying to think where to start. After all he had going for him was a name and nothing else, so it probably wasn't going to be an easy task. He spent the next hour going through every book in the S aisle one by one. He would take out the book, look through the title, then skim through the summary and the index looking for any reference to the name Sparta. However, it seemed this time Lady Luck was against. Even after going through at least 200 books, he had found no clue to Sparta. He did, however, come across a few books on sealing. What drew his attention to those books, however, was that they mentioned the name Uzumaki. Skimming through that book, he found that the Uzumaki were a clan that specialized in the art of sealing, also known as Fuin Jutsu. He kept that book on the side, and determined to look into the Uzumaki a little more. It wasn't every day that you find your last name mentioned in a book relating to an entire clan. By the end of the second hour of looking, he was sure he had gone through the entire section, but there was no mention of Sparta. None at all. He had decided to ask the old man if maybe he knew anything about the name, before focusing on his other discovery. He therefore left the S section and went to the U section. Luck was on his side this time, as almost immediately after getting there, he found the books he was looking for. History of the Uzumaki, Uzumaki Fuin Jutsu Theory, and finally, Chronicles of the Whirlpool, were some of the books he had found. Deciding that at least the first book was his best chance at getting information, he had decided to skim through it. And by skimming, he learned a few things. The first was the Uzumaki clan were a clan known best for their unique chakra and sealing abilities. With the density of their chakra, any seal they would create would be at least twice as strong than any created by any other shinobi. Furthermore, they were also known to have created some of the strongest seals used by shinobi of the modern times. Seals that are even used to restrain the toughest of shinobi, and the strongest of entities including the 9 Biju. He felt a strange twist in his gut after he read that last part, before deciding to continue skimming. Another piece of information he found to be interesting was the fact that the Uzumaki, who had their own village named Uzu-Shiogakure, the village hidden in the whirlpools, were close allies to Konoha by matrimony between the Hokage at the time, Hashirama Senju and Mito Uzumaki. That was also the reason why Konoha had the swirl pattern stitched to the back of their uniforms, and even his own shirt, as the swirl was the symbol of the Uzumaki. This last piece of information he read, however, was the one to make him immediately lose interest. The book mentioned how other than their sealing abilities, Uzumaki were most known for their red hair. Any hopes he had at actually being related to these Uzumaki was destroyed when he read that part. He would never say it out loud, however when he read he truly had been hoping he had found a clue that would get him closer to finding out about his family. To learning the truth about where they were, and who they were. Closing the book, he sighed, before deciding it was all nothing but a wild goose chase. He had wasted his day off in this dreary place, and eventually came out with nothing. Well, not completely nothing, since he decided to borrow some of these books on sealing. If nothing else, even though he hated reading and studying, the concepts and ideas in here were at least interesting, and could be useful in the future. He grabbed the 2 books that mentioned sealing theory and sealing for beginners, before heading over to the front desk. Once again, thankfully, the same girl that saw him coming in was the same person still sitting at the desk, which meant he might actually be able to end the day without a hitch. She turned to him while he approached. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "No, but I found something else. I was wondering if I can borrow these books, please?" She took a look at the books he selected, and raised an eyebrow. Sealing for beginners, this is quite an advanced topic. Usually only shinobi would borrow these. "Are you sure you can understand them?" She actually didn't sound condescending in her question, but genuinely surprised. "Yay, I think I can learn a few things from them." The girl shrugged, before asking for his ID. Naruto hesitated for a minute, before taking out his wallet and handing her the card. She took the card, logged the details in a big blue notebook on the desk, and returned the card to him. She then wrote down the book titles, before packing them in a plastic bag and handing it over. "I am supposed to inform you that your details are registered now that you have received the books. The first month is free, and you can return the books anytime without charges, but there is a late fee of 50 yen after the first month for every week delay. Also, in case the books are returned damaged, there will be a 10,000 yen fee for each damaged book. Do you accept those conditions? Naruto stood there for a few moments before nodding his approval. He was somewhat still surprised he was treated like any other person, so it took him a few moments to reply. Alright, thank you for your visit and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, he replied before heading over to the door. At the last step, he hesitated but turned back to the girl. Can I ask you something? When the girl nodded, he continued. What's your name? The girl looked surprised for a minute before smiling. My name is Mai, nice to meet you. The girl took a quick glance at the name she wrote down, Naruto. Nice to meet you too, Mai, replied Naruto, offering the nice girl a smile before he left. Perhaps his visit to the library wasn't a waste if he had managed to find someone else he could be on good terms with. A few weeks passed since Naruto's had visited the library for the first time. Since then, he had spent a surprising amount of time going over the books he found. Even though he was never much for reading, the topic of fuinjutsu had reeled him faster than ninjutsu ever could. As someone who appreciated the fine art of trap-making and setups due to his imaginative pranking streak, he found himself generally appreciating the art. He had enjoyed it so much that it took only 2 days to go through the entire book. After getting the general gist of the information, he had gone back and focused on the materials themselves, trying to learn the art. The first few chapters of the book specified the importance of having neat and fast kanji scripting skills. He struggled the most with that part, since he was never much for practicing that specific skill. But a while after that, he had reached a satisfactory level when comparing his notes to the book. Then, the book mentioned how in order to maintain the perfect compatibility between the user and the seal, the ink used would have to be infused with the essence of the user themselves. Usually that meant the ink had to be mixed with the user's blood and chakra. Masters of the art of fuinjutsu could skip this step later on, as they could usually utilize their will and draw the necessary runes for the seals without depending on ink, using their own minds and chakra. This step was much easier as the book mentioned the exact ratio between blood and ink necessary to perform the mix. Fuinjutsu was also an easy art when it came to manipulating chakra, at least for a beginner. All he had to do was pump some chakra into whatever he was trying to do with the right set of seals and voila. You now have a successful multi-purpose seal. The beginner book had details around some of the harmless but useful seals. Smoke tag seals, storage seals and perimeter detection seals. The first seal, obviously, converted the stored chakra in a burst of smoke that dissipate moments later. It was as good as a distraction when in a tight spot. The storage seal was used to seal small items into a dimensional space for safekeeping. Common sense dictated he be careful with this one, since it was easily the most dangerous between the three even if it was a beginner-level seal. He certainly didn't want to break any dimensional rules that might cause the end of the world, simply because he messed up a line. Thankfully, it had all went well, and as they say, practice makes perfect. The last seal was the perimeter detection seal. The seal would be placed somewhere, the edge of a window or around a campsite, and it would alert the seal user if a chakra signature crossed nearby the seal. The beginner-level seal had a low range of 5 meters, which wasn't much, but having more than one seal fixed that problem, for now at least. He had visited the library a few days earlier. He made sure to go on the same day of the weekend, early Saturday. He figured he might as well go when he knew for sure he would meet a friendly face. And sure enough, Mai was the one manning the front desk. After exchanging greeting, he went straight to the sealing section, and replaced his beginning-level books with the higher-level books. After getting what he needed, and passing by Mai's desk, he had gone home, stashed his books, and then went to train. Just because he was interested in the topic, he wasn't going to neglect his physical training. Life went back to normal a few weeks after for little Naruto, splitting his time between the academy, his own physical training and his personal fuinjutsu training. He had also met with Ayame and Tucci at the ramen booth a couple of times since. He hadn't seen the old man Hokage since the last time, but he was not going to go annoy him since the man was busy running the village. He was, however, considering it, especially since that dream he had of the man, Sparta, had been recurring to him now. Ever since it had come to him the first time, it had been happening again at least 2 or 3 times a week. It was honestly driving him crazy. Not only was it affecting his sleep, which would cause him to be a bit lazy and annoyed more than usual during his day at the academy, but it had been prickling at his sense of curiosity. He did his best to keep it from affecting him. He was just about to get fed up with that senseless dream. A few days more, and he had decided that enough was enough, and made his way to the Hokage's office. Since he had been spending his time more in his apartment, and less roaming the village, it became almost second nature for Naruto to ignore the looks he kept getting as he made his way to the Hokage Tower. As the red circular building, with the kanji for fire, came to view, Naruto experienced a feeling of unease in his stomach, before going on and climbing the stairs into the building. Finding his way to the Hokage's secretary, Naruto was just about to ask if he could see the Hokage, when the door opened to his office, and he was greeted to the sight of the old man. With him, however, was another with black hair, bandages that covered half his face except for his left eye, and extended all the way to his right arm, which was covered in a sling, and covered by his black and white kimono. The man's single eye stared at Naruto, and suddenly, he could feel that emotion of unease settling in his belly. Not to be deterred, Naruto locked eyes with the man's single eye unflinchingly. A few minutes earlier, Hokage office. Tensions were palpable in the Hokage office, as the Hiruzen kept the staring contest between him and his rival, Danzo Shimura. The man had been a long-serving shinobi, proving his loyalty to Konoha year after year. He had sacrificed blood, sweat and even his own body to preserve Konoha. Danzo had even been his rival during their youth, and he was a contender to inherit the position of Hokage after the Nidaime. However, it was the Nidaime's decision to make him, Hiruzen, the Hokage that seemed to drive a wedge in their friendship. Since then, they stopped seeing eye to eye in matters relating to the village, as Danzo's views were more focused on making the village itself more prosperous rather than the actual people of the village itself. Which brought them to another one of their constant arguments. The decisions related to the life of one child, Naruto Uzumaki. For the last time, Danzo, I will not give you custody over Naruto. Naruto needs to have as much of a normal life in the village, and to create bonds with the people. That's the way I want him to be, remarked Hiruzen. While he understood Danzo's point of view, he had no intention of putting his surrogate grandson through the hellish training Danzo had for him. Danzo maintained his composed visage. You cannot treat him like any other person in the village, Hiruzen. The boy is anything but normal. He is a Jinchuriki. To treat him the same way you would treat any other child is a mistake. He is a boy. Hiruzen's reply was harsh, showing that even with his old age, he was still the Hokage. We don't want any kind of side effects that might happen due to pushing him too far in his training while he is still young. We don't need him to end up like the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi, do we? Danzo had no reply to that. They had received the report of the incident from their resident spy master, Jiraiya. In the report, it mentioned how the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi, the son of the fourth Kage Rasa, had seemingly snapped and proceeded to murder his own uncle. Since that incident, multiple murders had occurred and reports indicated that they were all done by the Jinchuriki. The victims had all been crushed into fine paste and blood by the sand-controlling 7-year-old, a boy of the same age as Naruto. I will make sure that won't happen. And if he were to show signs of such behavior, I will be sure to nip it in the bud. He declared, as he stood from his seat, circling around Hiruzen to stand near the windows that overlooked the village. A Jinchuriki is a very powerful shinobi that needs to be trained and guided to become the village's sharpest kunai and strongest shield. A Jinchuriki that cannot use the power of its biju is useless to us. Ironically, he could see the subject of their conversation heading in the direction of the tower. Do you think it's easy to find another suitable host? The Kyuubi has always been in an Uzumaki, from his mother before him, to Lady Mito herself. Unless you have a hidden Uzumaki somewhere in your pockets, Naruto will stay as the Jinchuriki. And I want you to stay away from him, Danzo. If I hear that you were anywhere around him, or have interacted with him in any way, well, let's just say your long years of service will have to be ended in the most shameful of ways. Threatened Hiruzen. Danzo was too stubborn and hell-bent on his ways, Hiruzen knew. He had always had to keep at least one Anbu operative to guard Naruto at all times to make sure no one harmed him. The Anbu was only to interfere if there was immediate threat to Naruto's life. Usually, he only entrusted that duty to his most trusted of operatives, which was actually quite a short list. It was either Kakashi whenever he wasn't on any missions, Yugo, Tenzo, the previous root operative, or young Itachi. Recently, however, Itachi had not been on that duty due to the rising tension between the Uchiha clan and the rest of the village, no matter how hard he tried to act as the mediator. The Uchiha were too prideful and demanding, which was only increasing the damage between the two sides. The death of Shisui Uchiha had not done much to help in those efforts. Very well, Hiruzen, I will do as you say. But know this, one day you will regret this decision. Danzo replied, leaving the view of Konoha in front of him, shuffling his way into the door, while Hiruzen rose and followed him to the door of his office. After dealing with Danzo for any time period, he always liked to go to roof to clear his head and have a smoke. When they opened the door, Danzo saw the boy standing in front of him. The boy was small and short, even for a boy of his age. However, Danzo could see a certain strength of spirit in him. He knew if molded correctly, the boy could become one of the strongest shinobi in existence, even without the power of Biju within him. His heritage alone assured him of that. The son of the Konoha no Kiroi Senko and an Uzumaki. The sharp wit and calm facade of Minato Namikaze, which even he could see hiding in the eyes of the young boy, and the chakra and stamina powerhouse of Kushina Uzumaki. A legacy like that, so very similar to the slug princess of the Sannin, Tsunade Senju, arguably the strongest of the three Sannin, and the strongest kunoichi to exist to date. Truly, such a waste of talent. Hiruzen is making a huge mistake keeping you from me. Danzo did not linger any more than that, the tapping of his cane being heard as he made his way out of the tower, and back to his clan housing. Hiruzen couldn't help rubbing his forehead, trying to stave off the coming headache, before turning to Naruto. Welcome Naruto, what brings you here today? Here to visit this old man? Ohio, G-san. It's been a while since we last met and I wanted to come see you. I also had a question I wanted to ask you, he replied. However, he became a little hesitant, as he saw how tired the old man looked. If you don't mind, of course. If you're busy, it's fine and I can come back another day. Hiruzen smiled, gesturing for Naruto to follow him. No worries my boy, I could use a small break. He then tuned to his secretary. Akari-san, kindly hold all my meetings and appointments till I'm back. Hi Hokage-sama, replied the lady. Naruto hadn't been able to give her much thought, but he was glad he got to skip the time waiting for the old man. He quickly caught up, and followed him as they made their way to the roof of the building. Naruto hadn't noticed the time, but by the time they reached he could tell it was already noon. Since they were already entering March, the season was still mid-spring, the sun was just right, and the blowing breeze made sure to keep them cool. Naruto went to take a seat below the rail of the Hokage tower with his legs hanging, where he usually liked to sit whenever he got to visit the roof of the tower, which was maybe 2 or 3 times before. The old man, however, simply came to stand beside while he filled his pipe with tobacco. So Naruto, what did you want to ask me about? Oh, it's kind of weird old man, but I was wondering if you ever heard the name Sparta before. He asked. The old man paused for a second before replying, as he took a puff of his pipe. Afraid not my boy, I have never heard that name before. Where did you hear it? I kind of been having this weird dream lately. Immediately catching Hiruzen's attention, he looked at the young boy. What dream? Could the Kyuubi be influencing Naruto? He thought. Hiruzen listened carefully as Naruto began explaining his dream. He had honestly never heard of the name Sparta before, nor had he known a white-haired man in a blue coat. He was only worried if somehow the Kyuubi was involved in this. For dreams to affect a person's psyche, it mostly had to do with supernatural sources, and there was no bigger supernatural source than having a giant 9-tailed demon fox in your stomach. I see. Well, I understand your worry Naruto, but I do believe this is just a dream, and nothing you should worry yourself about. It's probably nothing but a figment of your imagination. Knowing you, I'm sure you probably just had too much ramen and it's starting to affect your sleep. He chuckled, ignoring Naruto's pout about the jab on his eating habits. Anyways, just let that dream out of your head and focus on more things. For example, how is the academy coming along with you? You should be nearing the end of the year exams. Are you ready for them? Sort of. He shrugged. I've been busy lately on a different project, so I'm a bit behind on the theoretical study. But my taijutsu is going well. As for my ninjutsu, I still can't do the stupid bunshin jutsu. When I practice, they either look pale and just fall to the floor, or they come out very small and they act weird. Hiruzen was floored for a minute before regaining his senses. He had never heard of a Bunshin Jutsu trial that had the clone pale and collapse to the floor. He had also never heard about one as small as Naruto described, where they started acting weird. Only with Naruto. He sometimes reminds me too much of you, Kushina-chan. He thought back to the tomboyish redhead, who would go around cracking the skulls of anyone that made fun of her red hair. Alright Naruto, I will tell you something, but you have to promise me that you won't tell anyone that I helped you, okay? I could be accused of playing favorites, and that could cause me some trouble. So if you keep quiet about it, I will give you a hint. Naruto could barely hold his excitement. If there was something that would help him get the Bunshin Jutsu down, he would definitely be improving his grades. I promise Gigi, I won't tell anyone, and I never go back on my promises. Please tell me. The old man smiled before bending to Naruto's ear and whispered, "Chakra control." Naruto blinked as he processed the info before blanching in disgust. Chakra control? You mean the leaf balancing exercise? I hate that exercise. He frowned. Everyone his class can do that thing for at least 10 minutes. I can barely do it for 5 minutes. He whined. He always had difficulty controlling his chakra for some reason. The leaf would either stick to his forehead and then slide down, or it would somehow blast itself off his forehead and flutter to the floor. I'm sorry Naruto-kun, I gave you the secret. The rest is up to you. I know you will be able to figure it out on your own, my dear boy. He stated. Naruto frowned before relenting. He was at least somewhere better than where he was before. He had a clue now what he had to do. But the leaf exercise was a no-go. That's when he remembered that he had access to a place with vast resources. A light went up in his head, and Naruto suddenly grinned, as he knew what he had to do. He had hit a breakthrough. For the first time in his life, Naruto experienced a sense of accomplishment, a joy that was just as equal as the first time he had had ramen and met the Ichirakus. It seemed ridiculous, considering it was simply because of the Bunshin Jutsu, a jutsu that most people were capable of doing at an even younger age. But it didn't matter to him. He had finally created a Bunshin. Technically, 4 Bunshin, but it was still something to celebrate for him, considering it had been his weakness for the past 2 years in the academy, and a source of constant ridicule from his other classmates. After following the advice of the old man, he immediately headed into the library, not even caring that it was the middle of the week, not his usually day to visit. Luckily for him, Mai had also been on the front desk, but for once there was someone else with her. A toddler that Mai had introduced as her baby brother. He was 2 years old, and too busy babbling about his toys to bother someone. Well, that was, until he saw Naruto's birthmarks, and then called him, Kitty, which annoyed him, and had Mai giggling at the scene. Grumbling to himself about the title, he let it be considering he was just a little kid. And that was how he had met baby Yokuto, or Yo-chan, as he was called by Mai. Moving on, he had gone to the chakra control section. Unlike other sections, since the topic of chakra control was considered a chakra jutsu, he found scrolls instead of balls talking about the topic, as well as chakra theory books. Ignoring the latter completely, he focused on the first scrolls. There, he found scrolls detailing chakra control exercises, all the way from the simplest, leaf balancing, to the most advanced, shape manipulation of chakra itself, a step that was necessary when creating new or personalized jutsu. A tempting concept to create his own jutsu, but Naruto knew he was still nowhere near being skilled enough to create his own jutsu. So, he stuck with the 2 exercises that were more in his ability, tree climbing and water walking. Perhaps once he felt he was good enough in the latter, he would take the following level, which was the waterfall walking exercise, where he would have to combine the 2 previous ones together at once. It took him about 2 months to succeed. The scroll mentioned that on average, a shinobi would be able to do the first exercise within 10 days, even though it took him much longer to get the grasp of it. It didn't bother him much, since he knew that people learned things at different paces. Besides, he always knew he wasn't one of the sharpest kunai in the holster, and it didn't matter to him. He had tried the Bunshin Jutsu just after finally getting the surface walking exercise down pat. He ended up with an 80% perfect group of clones. There were 8 of them, and the only difference between him and them was that they had wacky facial expressions. One of them had his eyes closed in a line, even though they were actually open. Another clone, for a lack of better terms, seemed as though it was doing its best to hold in a diarrhea. But he had been happy with some progress. And the faces they made served as good comic relief for a while. He had then gone and found a training ground with a pond where he could practice the surface walking. Thankfully, since most of his training was done in the afternoon after the academy, most of the training grounds were unoccupied and free for him to practice. He did however frequently see another student from the academy, an upper classmate he believed, sometimes using the training fields. He had a weird hairstyle, and always seemed to be wearing a white karate gi. He also had bandages wrapped his hands, which always had splotches of blood on the knuckles. He had considered asking the boy if he could train with him but decided against it when he thought about his chakra control. He could always talk to him after he had mastered the water walking exercise. The water walking exercise, even though it was much more difficult, was easier to get the hang of, after understanding what he should feel like while controlling his chakra in the tree walking exercise, and actually reading the full explanation that was in the water walking scroll. It mentioned that he would have to constantly change the output of his chakra in the form of a stream to keep floating on the surface. However, since it was a higher level exercise, it took a lot more chakra than the tree climbing, and he could only stay floating for about 10 minutes, 15 max, if he pushed himself. He was still after all only a 7-year-old, even with according to the old man's explanation bigger than usual reserves. He tired himself out past that point, since the amount of focus he had to exert drained even his unlimited stamina. He would sometimes even drain himself so much that he would pass out on the side of the pond he would be training next to and wake up an hour or two later. By then, it would be too hard to continue, as the sun was setting, so he would return home to rest and replenish his energy for the next day. But it was worth it. He had finally perfected the Bunshin Jutsu. And he knew exactly how to celebrate. With a big bowl of Ichiraku's ramen. The next day at the academy came at the perfect time for Naruto. For the first time ever, he was actually excited to go to the academy. It was finally his time to prove that had what it takes to be considered an equal to his classmates, and to become a shinobi for the village. They started with their usual history lessons in the morning, where one of the instructors, Iruka Amino, would spend his time trying to impart important historical events. Lessons that were supposed to help them fight against other shinobi. Naruto didn't see the appeal in that. Knowing about the history of the founding of the village never actually helped anyone in a fight. Information about the skills of a rival shinobi, knowing how to notice your opponents as they favored their left side for punches, or chose to fight with high and the ducking too low to beat them seemed more useful. So basically, common sense, or more like observation skills, but the point still stood that this lesson was a waste of time. Thankfully, he didn't have to wait too long, as just after that lesson, they were led outside of the classroom for their physical training. Taijutsu, Shurikenjutsu and Ninjutsu. So who wants to demonstrate their ninjutsu first? Asked Iruka. He was holding a board and checklist in hand looking at his students. He was surprised when the first student to raise their hand was Naruto. He nodded and gestured for the boy to take center field. Naruto had always been within the standard when it came to 2 of the 3 academy jutsu, but simply horrible with the last one. Hench! Exclaimed Naruto, with a veil of smoke covering him. By the time it was all gone, Naruto had turned into an exact copy of the Hokage, minus some features. Good Naruto, good. I would simply point out that you are missing some points with the transformation. Firstly, the Hokage is a little bit taller than what you transformed into, and he also has a few more liver spots on the side of his face. But overall, very good. He praised. Who's next? He asked, turning to his students. Wait, Iruka-sensei, there's more. Replied Naruto in perfect Hiruzen imitation. He then formed the hand seals for the Bunshin Jutsu, and Iruka sighed as he saw what was about to happen. He was certainly not in the mood to try and rein them back after the stunt Naruto was about to pull. He was, however, pleasantly surprised with the results. There they were standing right next to the original Naruto, who was still holding his henge, 4 clones of the Hokage himself. A few odd expressions appeared from the students behind, and Iruka couldn't blame them. He took a few steps closer and inspected the clones, making sure they didn't have any of the previous quirks that only seemed to happen when Naruto did the jutsu, but there weren't any. There were 4 perfect identical clones. Keeping the transformation and maintaining the clones at the same time was what made it even more impressive. Iruka shortly clapped with a smile covering his face, before quickly wiping it off. Well done Naruto. I can see that you have been practicing well. Keep it up and you might be able to graduate soon, that is if you improve on your other weaknesses. As happy as he was to see students bettering themselves and succeeding where they had failed before, he still remembered that this was Naruto. This was the one person he could not bring himself to be happy for. The main Naruto, Hiruzen, frowned at the dismissive tone, before releasing both jutsu. He looked at Iruka for a minute, before staying quiet and moving back to the lineup of students, and in that moment, Iruka felt bad about how he had dismissed the boy. Clearing his throat, he then went through the roster, picking other students and allowing them the chance to demonstrate their own techniques. All the while Naruto stayed at the back, ignoring the jeering kids around him. Finally, the loser can do some clones. Took you long enough, Baka. Taunted a boy. He was a brown-haired, with red fang marks on his cheeks and slitted black eyes, features most common between the members of the Inuzuka clan. His comment earned a few more jeers at the blonde kid. Naruto usually never rose to these disputes, knowing that 1. They were just trying to annoy him and by ignoring them he would be the one annoying them, and 2. They were just trying to make themselves feel better by mocking someone else. But for once, Naruto was not in the mood to ignore them. Not after the earlier dismissal he encountered, and how his efforts had been thrown aside. At least I can still learn and get better. Unfortunately, I wish I can say the same about your smell, dog breath. Replied Naruto. The surrounding students were immediately hooked, as chants of fight and cheering covered the crowd. The boy in question grew red in the face before clenching his fist, causing his animalistic nails to bite into his flesh. He was just about to take the swing when Iruka interfered. Enough Naruto, Kiba. If you have anything you want to settle, then get into the taijutsu field. That seemed to put on a smile on the boy's Kiba's face as they both headed into the ring. I will teach the idiot a lesson for insulting me, he thought. He was from the Inuzuka clan, a clan that specialized in taijutsu, and he was the fastest student in the class. The loser is going to get his now. Now, perform the hand sign for confrontation, both of you. Commanded Iruka. Naruto rolled his eyes at that, but complied, nonetheless. The sign of confrontation was supposed to mean that the fight they were about to have was between rivals and equals and was meant to promote respect between the two combatants. Somehow, he doubted that Kiba had any of that in mind. As soon as they performed the sign, and Iruka announced the beginning of the match, Kiba had jumped straight at Naruto with his hands aimed as claws intent in a slash. Naruto barely got his hands up to block the attack and took the scratches to his forearm. Hissing slightly from the sting of his elongated fingernails, Naruto quickly hopped back. That's when he noticed something. His jump had almost accidentally taken him out of the ring. He didn't have time to think about it. Kiba immediately closed in on him again. This time however, there was more of a distance between them, and Naruto had more time to prepare a counterattack. He quickly grabbed the offending limb from Kiba with both hands. Kiba attempted a low sweeping kick to force Naruto to let go of his arm. Hopping over the sweep, Naruto's feet landed back on the ground, before hopping again, this time right into Kiba's face. The top of Naruto's head met with Kiba's face, and a crunch sounded out as Kiba's nose was hit by the thickest part of the human skull. Kiba immediately crumbled to the floor, howling and holding his twisted nose as blood poured down his face. Iruka was quick to end the spar and raced to check on Kiba. After feeling around for a bit on Kiba's face, Iruka grimaced, and told Kiba that he would have to stay still while he realigned the bones. Kiba complied, but tears were still pooling at the corner of his eyes, as his nose kept bleeding. A sharp tug, and the bone was back in place. Iruka quickly helped Kiba back to his feet and called Mizuki, his assistant, to take the boy to the academy nurse for a checkup. All the while, Naruto was staring with his mouth agape, not knowing what had happened. He never meant to do the things he did, he had been simply going on instinct the entire spar. But now that he thought about, he knew what he had done. He had been, unconsciously, circulating his chakra through his body, probably due to the adrenaline or out of habit. Which explained the boost in power between his backpedaling that almost took him out of the ring, and trying to take a step closer to punch Kiba, which ended up with him slipping and head-butting Kiba. This definitely needs more testing, thought Naruto. He then turned to Iruka as he called out to him. That's it for you today, Naruto. Go back to the classroom and stay there until I come get you. Understood? Naruto ended up getting reprimanded for using unnecessary force in a friendly spar. Ironic. A headbutt was considered unnecessary force, but it was completely fine to use sharp nails. He had already healed from the scratches and had simply wiped off the tiny bit of blood that came from it, but it was the idea that counted. That day when he was leaving the academy, he saw most of the parents glaring at him more than usual, probably being told by their children about what he had done. He cared little though for their glares and went on to his usual training grounds. When he got there, he first completed the set of stretches he always does before any workout. It was better to waste a few minutes before and after when he actually had the energy than be sore for the rest of the day. Afterwards, he began to lap around the training field, while thinking about what had happened, and how he could have done it. Maybe it's the same as when I'm doing the tree climbing exercise. I just focus my chakra and push it in a constant stream to my feet. When doing so, he noticed that he was slowing down, his feet were dragging and sticking his sandals to the dirt below. Okay, on second thought maybe not my feet. Maybe, my legs? Again, he did the same process, but focused on his legs, his calves, thighs and hips, and this time he had much better results. He felt energized, stronger and faster. He felt he could keep on running until the next day. He was also much faster now, at least double his usual speed. Okay, this is awesome, he thought, adrenaline building up in his body. As he kept running faster and faster, he suddenly felt the same way he did while he was in the spar. His chakra spread through his entire body, empowering all of his limbs, from the top of his head to the bottom of his toes. He could focus much better now. He could smell the scent of the moisture in the water in the pond from 50 meters away, and he was still getting further away. He could hear the wind blowing in his ears, but also, the chirping of animals in the nearby forest. He began to turn in the direction of the pond, and felt his lungs inflate and deflate with each breath. He could see the slightest shift in the water's surface and could tell which bushes had animals in them as they bustled in the distance. He was too intoxicated by his own senses to notice his chakras surging around him, covering him with a bright blue cloak and dispersing the dust near his feet with every step. Until suddenly, everything shut down. His chakra cut off, the euphoria gone, and he was left with nothing but an empty feeling. He did not slow down from his sprint, but more like crashed and got dragged through the dirt by the kinetic energy left from his sudden deceleration. When he stopped, he found himself on the rim of the pond, covered in scratches, cuts and bruises. Naruto hissed in pain as he slowly stood up. Not only was he covered in physical injuries, but he also felt dizzy and parched. He began to make his way to pond to at least try to cool the wounds on his body, but he collapsed right next to the water's edge. The last thing he saw was a white dog-themed mask appearing in front of his eyes, before it all went dark. Mindscape. A pair of massive red eyes slowly opened, as it felt its container faint. The Kyuubi's vulpine maw twitched upwards in the darkness of his cage at the events that had just happened. The boy had just experienced his first chakra exhaustion. He had exerted himself and lost control of his chakra. He kept pushing and drawing his chakra into and out of his body. The amount of released chakra had been more than enough to draw the attention of the Anbu shinobi, one of the Anbu, who were always looking after the boy. His crash from when he had completely exhausted his chakra would be easy to heal from, but it was also a huge source of entertainment for the being sealed within. Watching this human tumble on the dirt might be cruel, since the human in question was a 7-year-old, but it was still hilarious. However, what was more interesting, with this chakra exhaustion, it would seem he would finally be able to meet his container. With a grin on his face, the Kyuubi decided it would have fun terrorizing the human. He might even be able to convince the boy to release him. It would be easy considering the boy held no attachment to the flesh bags that surrounded him. Yes, he might finally be able to get free. Mindscape, sewer tunnels. Naruto groaned as he felt himself wake up again. That was not fun experience, and he would defiantly never do it again. Feeling water on his face and below him, Naruto sighed. Great, I fell in the po. Wait, if I fell in the water, then why am I barely wet? He thought. Looking around, Naruto knew one thing. This is definitely, obviously not a pond. On the opposite, in fact, it seemed as though he was somewhere indoors, judging by the lack of sunlight and the high walls that surrounded him. He then looked down, and his hands were floating on water, but he was not controlling his chakra to do the water walking exercise. He also noticed that his face or clothes were not wet anymore. Okay, this is weird. Where am I? What is this place? He thought, looking around. Behind him was nothing but pitch darkness, so that was not the way to go, and the sides had nothing but walls, which left only one option: to go forward. The place was obviously a sewer, but not like any other sewer he had seen in Konoha, and he had been to a few. Simply out of curiosity and boredom, of course. Seeing no other way, Naruto got up and made his way forward, following the paths of the sewer. As he was traversing, he couldn't help the trepidation and fear building up in his stomach. It was similar to that time he visited the old man, but this time it was 100 times worse. There was nothing around but the sounds of dripping water, the same walls, same floor, same ceiling. Pipes extending on both sides of the wall, some of them were vibrating from what he assumed was running water, while a few were simply there, seemingly dried up. Those ones were the ones had the sound of the dripping water coming from them. What felt like hours passed while he was walking, but they were mere moments, before he finally found something completely different. The hallway he was walking in seemed to expand into a large room. The ceiling became so high it vanished, leaving nothing but blackness, while the hallway tunnels kept expanding to the sides of the room until it was miles between them. There were huge steel beams at the end of the room, with a piece of paper that had the kanji for seal in the middle of one of them. The feeling of fear grew the closer he got to the room. His hands were shaking and he felt an invisible weight in the room pressing down on him. It felt like gravity increased with each step he took, and it took far too much effort to keep moving than he would have liked. It's actually more like a gate than beams. The gates of a cage of some sort, he thought. A sudden rumble brought his attention straight to the gate, and that was when he saw it. Two huge slitted eyes, red as blood, met his baby blue eyes. A second later, he realized that rumble was not just a random rumble or an earthquake of some sort. It was the breathing of a giant. Orange appendages that looked similar to tails appeared and flickered their way between the iron bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Naruto suddenly gulped, his breath caught in his throat and a shiver passed through his spine. The feeling of gravity intensified, he could almost feel his lungs, stomach and heart drop. The eyes were then joined by a white maw, filled with jagged razor-sharp teeth. Each tooth was the size of a fully grown man. Red eyes. 9. Orange tails. Kyubi. A roar followed, merely confirming his spoken thought. Naruto's body, real world. As soon as he landed next to the boy, he checked for a pulse. Finding a steady heartbeat, he then checked the boy's injuries. After making sure nothing was broken, and already seeing the scratches and bruises fading away, no doubt due to the biju sealed within him, Inu breathed a sigh of relief. He then carried the boy's body and propped it against one of the trees in the clearing. Standing up, he dug out a piece of fabric, the fabric he usually used to cover his precious stories to keep them from getting dirty. He quickly dunked it into the pond and went back to wipe his dirty, messed up face. After that, he swiped the cloth over the boy's arms and legs to try to clean him from the dirt and grime, before jumping into a branch on a nearby tree and settling to keep watch over the boy's sleeping body. Inu, also known as Kakashi Hitaki, was one of the Anbu assigned to protect and keep a close eye on Naruto for the Hokage. The other Anbu had all protested such duty, stating that they were more valuable on the field than to babysit a brat, even if that was their resident Jinchuriki. Kakashi, on the other hand, had put an end to their arguments when he agreed to do it. He was the highest ranking between them at the time. His acceptance of the mission was more than enough to silence any complaints they had. Hiruzen, however, knew the real cause why he had agreed to take on this mission. After all, he and Naruto related in a special bond, even though Naruto himself didn't know it. Kakashi had been, after all, the student of Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father, and a member of the old Team 7, which made Kakashi sort of Naruto's god brother. Since then, he had done his best to look after Naruto from a distance, never interfering, but always making sure he was sufficient in life. The Hokage had assured him and the rest of the team that this mission would end the second Naruto was deemed old enough to live on his own without any risk to his life, but Kakashi didn't mind the mission so much. Tenzo had tried to talk to him once about it, asking if Kakashi was interested in Naruto's life. Then why did he not try to adopt him? Surely such an event would be accepted by the Hokage. Kakashi however had rebuked. He said that he couldn't adopt Naruto since that would raise suspicion regarding their connection, and thus link Naruto to the Yondaime, which was something they wanted to avoid at all costs. He also added that he wouldn't be able to care for young Naruto, since he was a very crucial asset for Konoha, and couldn't afford to retire from Anbu just to care of him. While Tenzo was convinced with the given answer, Kakashi knew deep down that it was bullshit. The real reason why Kakashi did not want to adopt Naruto was to protect the boy from the curse that was tied to him. Yes, Kakashi believed himself to be cursed. Ever since he was a young boy, anyone that dared get close to Kakashi ended up dying. His mother who had died while he was very young. His father who had committed seppuku after failing a mission. His teammates Obito, then Rin, and later Minato and his wife. Everyone who had ever meant something to him had ended up dying. And he would never forgive himself if his interference caused the death of his sensei's only son. Besides, he thought looking down at his current charge, the boy doesn't any help. He's quite cunning and crafting on his own. This young child kept surprising him day after day. To think the boy would be able to master the tree climbing exercise and was at least proficient in the water walking exercise. It was phenomenal. Genin these days were weaker than they were in his time. Granted, he was a genin during a time of war, and thus the village did not have the time to waste on training genin. No, at that time they needed soldiers. Academy students that showed talent were immediately drafted and assigned a Jonin sensei. The Jonin would then beat the genin into shape and then send them to the front lines once they were strong enough. Naruto, however, was going on the right track to becoming a great shinobi. He wasn't expecting anyone to give him the information or the training, but he was pushing himself into getting things done. He had taken the initiative and learned advanced for an academy student in this time chakra control skills and perfected one of his weaknesses. What had happened later on in the day and in the academy was very much normal. What Naruto had just learned was a trick most Chunin depended on, which was the chakra augmentation technique. By channeling chakra throughout the body, a shinobi is able to revitalize their body and experience a rush of power that would allow them to keep up with even higher level shinobi. However, as Naruto had discovered, this ability came with a price, especially worse for a first-time user. Naruto had utilized all of his chakra and kept pushing his limits further and further until he ended up using all of his chakra, which caused him to fall into a chakra exhaustion coma. While dangerous for most shinobi, for Jinchuriki, chakra exhaustion was a minor issue. He had seen the boy collapse during the water walking exercise multiple times. Granted, he never reached the point of fainting, but he had pushed himself too far this time. Naruto had channeled so much chakra, it became visible, framing his body. This was a feat that very few could boast to achieve, and those were only in the Jonin rank and above. Looking at the sky above, Kakashi slowly relaxed and extended his senses to make sure no one was around before relaxing against the branch and taking out his Icha book from his back pocket to entertain himself until Naruto wakes up. The Kyuubi watched as his host hyperventilated at the mere thought of him. It was an expected reaction. If it had been any other reaction, he himself would have been shocked. "Su, what brings you, my mighty jailer, to my presence today, he asked. "Perhaps you have come here to use my chakra, or maybe, you're here to assure me how you would make sure I would never escape my prison? Is that the reason you're here?" He mocked, a deep-throaty chuckle escaping him. Naruto was too shocked to reply. His mouth hung open, his body now openly shivering in fear. When the Biju had begun to talk, it seemed as though lights had been summoned by his words. Now, he could see the size and appearance of the fox. The beast was laying down on its haunches, yet it still seemed to be bigger in size than the entire Hokage mountain. Its 9 furry tails seemed to have a mind of their own, as they swished back and forth behind the great beast. Its whole body was covered in reddish-orange fur, except for black fur around its eyes that stretched to its ears. Its eyes had red irises with black slits for pupils and an upper body structure of a human, complete down to the opposable thumbs on its clawed hands. Overall, no description could capture the sheer size and power contained in the beast. No wonder the entire village is scared of this beast. "I can't even move," thought Naruto. The Kyuubi seemed to smirk at the palpable fear in Naruto's eyes. It didn't need its eyesight to know that his host was frozen solid by fear. At least he would give him one thing: he still hadn't soiled himself, Something that would have pissed off the great beast rather than entertain it. "What's the matter, boy? Fox got your tongue?" snarked the fox. He almost snickered at his own joke but managed to hold in his reaction. "Speak, boy." He snarled the word, boy. "Such a cowardly vessel I have ended up with. You can't even breathe while in my presence. If you have nothing to say, then be gone. I have no interest in speaking with such a mindless ape." Seeing no reaction from the boy, Kyuubi rested its massive head on its haunches. Naruto heard the beast but was still unable to move, until he caught a word that the demon had said. He said vessel, and before that he mentioned I am his jailer. What does he mean by that? Where are we? The beast heard his question but did not bother moving. Instead it looked at the human, its eyes piercing straight through his soul, and seemed to find him lacking, as it scoffed and closed its eye. "We are in the seal on your stomach, you dim-witted ape. Your own mindscape." Naruto paused, before hesitantly raising the front of his shirt. There, on his stomach, he could see a seal. A spiral seal on the center of his stomach, with 8 branching lines of kanji. A seal that had never existed before this moment, and he would know considering it was his stomach. Even if he had become familiar with seals, this level of sealing was way beyond his understanding. This was a seal created by a seal master. And the person responsible for the defeat of the Kyuubi was the Yondaime. He was also known as a seal master. He recalled the piece of information he had picked up from the library books. So, the Yondaime never killed Kyuubi. He sealed it inside me, he realized. With that, however, another thought crossed his mind. Is this why? Is this the reason? The answer that I was always looking for. Why did they treat me the way they do? Is because of the Kyuubi, but it didn't make any sense. Do they actually think I'm it? And it me? Are they stupid? No longer was fear restricting his movement, as instead anger replaced it. The change in emotion drew Kyuubi's attention and it smirked at its container. So, he's not so weak after all. Instead of despairing, he is angry. Good. That should prove useful to me. How could they think that? It's basic sealing. The scroll used to store the kunai isn't the kunai. The kunai isn't the scroll. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Are they pretending, or are they actually that stupid? All this time, the glares, the whispers, the isolation. It all made sense now. They were treating him as though he was a monster. As if he was an animal that would one day shed its skin and attack them. It all made sense now. He was a Jinchuriki. And not any Jinchuriki. He was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Did the old man know? He wondered. He had to. After all, he was the Hokage. He had to have known. Nothing ever happened in the village without the Hokage's knowledge. Was he just pretending to be my friend? Was he just trying to keep on my good side so that he can use me later? No, he wouldn't accept the thought, but everything would make so much sense if it did. The Kyuubi grinned maliciously as it saw the boy doubt his entire existence. He knew the boy had no idea about being a Jinchuriki. The seal was created so that it only showed if he was using its chakra. So it never appeared before, otherwise, even with his limited knowledge in sealing, he wouldn't be able to question the fact. But meeting the boy, it was so much better. Yes, boy. They all know you are my Jinchuriki. You might have never understood it, but by being my Jinchuriki, you gained an empathic ability from me. You are able to sense the intents of people around you. Remember, that time you felt something was wrong when you were heading to visit the old man? That was your empath ability warning you of danger. The same feeling you had as you made your way into my cage. Training your chakra control the way you have been doing can further your ability, but you still need to actually push for it to work. If you use it while you are walking around in the village, you will be able to feel the hatred they have towards you. You will see for yourself the emotions they have hidden deep down their black human hearts. It chuckled then, as though amused by the thought. I see now, he replied. His head was lowered, his hair shadowing his face. It was all coming back to him now. Rushing into his brain. The facts. Iruka dismissing his ninjutsu and praising the other students. That stupid cashier in the grocery store. Parents glaring and whispering as they picked up their children from the academy, while he would make his way alone. Demon. Monster. Abomination. He suddenly heard their whispers. The cruelty they showed him. His fellow humans. How could they let him become a shinobi? His hands started to shake again, but this time instead of fear, anger was all he felt. Pure rage coursed through his veins. Go away, you stupid brat. Kyuubi smirked maliciously as its dark red chakra, without prompting from him, slithered its way out of the cage, coiling its way to Naruto. The chakra covered Naruto's body, responding completely to his will. "Frustrating, isn't it?" said the fox. Naruto raised his head and his eyes met Kyuubi's, but they didn't look the same. Red slitted eyes met red slitted eyes as the fox smirked. "This whole time you thought that their hatred was justified. That there was an actual reason why they treated you like scum, only to find out that it's all because of me. Because one man decided to use you as a sacrifice, to save some ungrateful hairless apes." Kyuubi was pleased with the results. At this rate, convincing the boy to remove the seal might be just as easy. All he needed was a little push. "Tell you what, boy, remove the seal on my cage. Those ignorant humans won't even know what hit them. I will make sure to deliver you the revenge you seek. They won't suffer, they will all die a quick death. I will erase the entire village from existence all in one swoop. They won't feel a thing. Then you will move on and finally meet the flesh bags that gave birth to you, whoever they are." He lied. After all, revealing the information that it was him who had killed his parents might be counterproductive. Then again, technically, he wasn't the one to kill them. He simply made their death faster. Minato was going to die either way as a price for the entity he had summoned, while Kushina was going to die from having a biju extracted from her body. Him piercing their bodies with his claw when they jumped to take the hit for their son wasn't his fault. Naruto was truly tempted, not only by Kyuubi's words, but also because of the intoxicating feeling of the power that engulfed him. Looking at his hands, he could see the red chakra covering them, causing his skin to tingle and heat up, while his nails elongated into claws. Looking at his reflection in the water, Naruto could see a real monster. His whisker marks had become more jagged and feral. His hair also experienced a change as it became akin to spikes, giving him an animalistic look. Lastly, red slitted eyes stared back at him in the reflection. Whispers floated into his ears. "Kill, violate, destroy, show no mercy. Show them how they should have respected you. Show them your power, no, our power." It was ironic. For a long time, they had treated him like a monster. And now he was an actual monster. The power of the monster they feared was flowing through him, empowering him. But then, a sudden flashbacks of memories crossed his mind. The time he had shared some of the fish he had caught with the old man, the Hokage, when he had first met him when he was much younger. Somewhere deep down, this power felt wrong. The first time he had visited Ichiraku Ramen and found the smiling face of Tucci and Ayame. They had offered him a free meal, and in return he would have to bring a friend with him the next he visited. Tucci almost had a heart attack when he had returned with the Hokage. He could feel disgust beginning to form in his stomach, as something roared at him to reject this power. Mai and her baby brother, who while not necessarily close to him, had been a memory that stuck in his mind. Seeing how a sibling treated their younger sibling, their family, and trying to get her baby bother to eat his food, which he seemed to dislike, causing him to spill the mashed food all over the table, and Mai to panic while cleaning it all up to keep the books from getting stained. Looking up into Kyuubi's eyes, something within him burst. Kyuubi could only look at his container, as the entire mindscape shook. His chakra that was oh so close to finally taking control of the boy flinched back from him as he was covered in a purple aura. Kyuubi could only watch as his container was engulfed in this bluish-purple energy. His features returned to normal, except for two: his hair and his eyes. His eyes became a pure deep dark blue that covered his entire sclera. His hair seemed to shift between golden blonde and snowy white as the wave of power ran through his veins. Power, pure uncontained power burst from the boy. Power that Kyuubi had never felt in his actual life. But he had experienced it before when he had been part of the entity known as Jubi. Power that had been used long ago by the devil that was later known to be the Dark Knight himself. Power that had been inherited by the two sons born from the union between a devil and a human. Power that was used to combat it time after time by the eldest son, until the old man Rikudo had finally defeated his previous form and created his current one. Power that belonged to Sparta, so he is a descendant of that man. For Naruto, the power he felt now was far more natural. It felt like it belonged to him, it made him complete. His rage was gone. His anger diminished into nothing. He couldn't feel anything anymore, numb to the world. He felt calm but powerful, like a basin of fire lit then fanned by the wind. The wave of power barely lasted a minute, before it was all gone, and he was back to normal. The mindscape stopped vibrating and the vulpine maw of the fox had lost all traces of sadistic humor and malice. Its face was almost serious. Its gaze intense, but benevolent. Kyuubi was the first to break the silence. It seems I have misjudged you, boy. You are far more than I ever expected. What do you mean by that? What happened to me now? He asked. He needed to know what had just happened. It was as if he had lost control over his body twice, but the second time was a lot more pleasant than the first. I am done talking to you now, boy. Leave me and be gone. This conversation for today is over. No, wait, tell me, I need to know, he shouted. I said be gone. A gust of wind blew from Kyuubi's cage, carrying Naruto with it and sending him sailing through the long winding hallway, his screams growing distant by the second. Kyuubi hummed as it rested its head once more on its haunches. This is very unexpected, but equally interesting. Perhaps staying with this brat a little while longer might prove to be more entertaining than I thought. If the boy truly is of that devil's blood, even I won't be able to escape my prison by force. But perhaps there is another way. Real world. Naruto awoke with a gasp, and found himself laying under a tree in the clearing where he usually trained. Breathing heavily, he looked around trying to find any clue as to whether this whole thing was a dream more like nightmare or if it had actually happened. That was when he found a single kunai, with a piece of paper attached to it. Picking up the kunai, noting how new it was, he read the paper. Chakra augmentation. It read. What is that supposed to mean? He wondered. Looking around and finding no clue, he shrugged before attempting to get up. Attempting was the keyword, since as soon as he tried, he could feel his sore body protesting the movement. Huffing in annoyance, he decided to soak himself in the pond to cool off his body. Stripping down to his boxers, he placed his clothes on the pond's bank, and slowly slid himself into the cold water. Thinking back to what he had just experienced, he glanced down to his middle section, only to find it once more, seal-free. Letting it go for the moment, he tried to relax his body in the water. Thinking on it, he could tell that someone was trying to help him for some reason. Maybe it had been the old man again, offering him another piece of advice. Or maybe there was someone else who benefited from his improvement. Thinking of the Hokage made him think about his recent discovery. It wasn't every day you discovered that you housed the strongest of the 9 Biju. Then again, he also knew that the information was being kept from him on purpose, which meant he couldn't reveal to anyone that he himself knew. But there was still a way to find out the old man's intentions. All he needed to do was to learn how to control it. After all, the Kyuubi had given the exact tool he needed. A foxy grin covered his face. He might not be able to get some answers from the fox, but he could find some on his own now. Ironically, it was all thanks to the same stupid fox himself that he could do it now. It was now late December now, a few more months had passed since the day he had discovered many answers, but only to unlock many more questions. The season changed, going through summer, then fall, and now it was midwinter. The entire village was covered with a thick sheet of snow, and the moon barely showing behind the many clouds. The snow had become so thick lately, that parents demanded their children stay at home, and so, the academy had been shut down until further notice. Not that it bothered Naruto much. The now 8-year-old hadn't changed much. He was still the same small, blonde-haired kid that everyone avoided. His appearance only changed to suit the weather. He added an extra layer to help him deal with the biting cold. An orange jacket, and a red scarf that covered his lower face, along with his neck. Even with the frozen temperatures and the strong winds, he didn't have much trouble with the cold. It never bothered him. He had always wondered why was that, since everyone else would be covered in several layers, and he was always fine with just a single jacket. However, it wasn't a mystery for him any longer. He had discovered the existence of a massive demon living in his stomach. He had gained many benefits from the beast that had never made sense before, but they did now. Complete immunity to any type of sickness. Check. An above-average body temperature. Check. The ultra-fast healing factor. Check. Huge chakra reserves that made it harder for him to learn chakra control. Double check. After his incident in the training fields, he had decided to check the library again for information about his weird ability and this chakra augmentation. The latter had been much easier to find. There were at least a dozen books that explained what he had done, but, much to his chagrin, they were all ridiculously complicated. He had picked one of the books and skimmed through the introduction, and that much alone had given him a headache. The books detailed how the process of chakra augmentation happened, in exact boring details. It talked about cells, capacity, interference and other such mumbo-jumbo, except it was times 12, and each book was at least 200 pages long. The words themselves even seemed to be too difficult for him to understand, and he had asked for Mai's help in translating some of them. Thankfully, the girl had been available, and helped him get the gist of the information. It basically explained how by spreading his chakra throughout his body, he could empower his limbs and strengthen them far beyond his natural ability. However, it wasn't without its own harmful side effects. First, it weakens the muscles, which means that he can only do it for a certain while, and it doesn't help in training. Second, it uses a large amount of chakra from the user, which can cause chakra exhaustion, as he had experienced firsthand. Though it should be mentioned that he was affected by the chakra cost of the technique due to losing control over his, chakra, which didn't make sense, considering he found out about it from the chakra control exercises. Finally, it makes him much easier to be discovered and tracked by chakra sensors. Why the books didn't have a summary on the technique that only mentioned the important parts about it, he would never know. After he was done with the first technique, he went and researched his second ability. And what a find it was! The ability that he had was a very important one. An ability that would later on become a cornerstone for his every action, regardless of how petty it seemed. He got an awesome sensory ability, a term that he had heard from a passing shinobi, and later researched in the library that helped him read people's emotions. Trial and error with his ability had clued him into a few facts. It seemed to mainly focus on negative emotions, which was not saying much considering it was gift from a being that seemed to thrive on hate and anger. Fear was also another emotion he had come to detect. Despair was the one he hated the most, as it seemed to fill him with an equal portion of the emotion. He had learned that the hard way. He had found himself at a roof somewhere in the middle of the village, out of sight of bystanders, and decided to try and learn how it worked. He kept looking at the people, going through their normal lives, and tried to channel his chakra throughout his body as a way to activate it. He didn't have much luck with that. He then decided to will his ability to activate, concentrating his attention on a passing by mother and her crying child. The first attempt, he could feel something forming in the back of his head, but had lost it seconds later. He kept trying and trying, until eventually it had happened. A passing man, who seemed to be in a foul mood, had been his first successful attempt. The man's potent frustration and anger caused his senses to light like a bonfire. The way it happened, however, was that it simulated the emotion of his target in his own mind. So the man's anger and frustration had become his own as well. At that moment, he felt anger, but at no one in specific. He felt frustrated, but literally at nothing at all. He knew then he would have to develop his self-control, so that he didn't lose himself to the emotions of those he targeted. Once that attempt had succeeded, however, he had been able to use it as frequently as he wanted. He tested it on every single person he could see. A merchant who reeked of greed, trying to overprice his wares on a desperate man. A boy who was crying in the street, childish anger at his parents' refusal to buy him sweets from the grocery store, and the parents' annoyance, anger and embarrassment, trying to avoid the judging stares of the people around. The boy was probably going to be punished when they got home. He had kept training the skill, that it had become almost second nature. Now by simply looking at someone, his sensing was able to pick up all of his target's deepest emotions. He had also decided to name it, considering as far as he knew he was the only one to have ever had it. He had christened it, Sudama, named after the corrupted Kodama, the spirit guardians of the forests. He thought it fit, considering both the Sudama and his ability were related to the negative emotions of humans. He had actually heard a heavy snort in his head, which had caused to jump in fear, scaring the bystanders around, and causing them to glare at him, which could have only been from Kyubi. Another thing was the Kyubi. He had tried multiple times after their first encounter to enter his mindscape to talk to the beast again, but had failed each time. He had tried calling out to it in his mind, of course. He didn't need people thinking he was crazy too, and had even tried to provoke it into answering, but it had all been useless. He was sure it knew he wanted to talk, but seemed intent on ignoring him completely. Back to his Sudama, it had also been very helpful to him personally. After further training, he had been able to sense people's exact thoughts towards him. Sometimes, he regretted his decision to do that though. Hatred, anger, fear, disgust, the same emotions he had always seen on their faces, was present inside their hearts as well. And none of it was actually aimed at Kyuubi himself, they were aimed at him. They actually thought he was Kyuubi. Some ridiculous theory that their human imagination made up, that he was probably Kyuubi in human form, changed by the Yondaime. What drove it home for him, however, was his veiled confrontation with the Hokage. After mastering his Sudama, he had visited the Hokage. He had sat with the man, conversed with him, then innocently asked him the important questions. "Why does everyone hate me?" Shocked, the man hesitated, then pretended he hadn't heard the question and tried to change the subject. He didn't let him. He asked him again. The man sighed and replied. The actual answer didn't matter to him, the summary and the man's emotional state did. "They don't hate you, Naruto. They're just scared. Fear drives people to do stupid things. But you have to give them a chance. They will come around and see you as the amazing boy that you are." Discomfort, guilt, fear and sadness were the prevalent emotions. The fact that the man had tried to change the subject clued him in that these were not questions he wanted to answer. "Do you know my parents? Where are they? And why did they leave me?" Shock, grief, reluctance and an even bigger amount of guilt and discomfort, before he apologized, saying he didn't know who or where they were. It was a lie. He felt it, but he didn't show it. He could tell the old man didn't necessarily hate him, and was genuine in caring for him, but the man was still holding himself back. Kyuubi chose that moment to talk him. It said, "I see you are starting to understand. In the shinobi world, it is kill or be killed. Survival of the fittest. These humans don't care that they are hurting an innocent life, so long as they get their revenge. Humans are petty that way. They always have been, and they always will be. Granted, there are a few humans who are worth the effort, but the love of a few cannot outweigh the hate of the many. They will never accept you as one of them." Unlike their previous conversation, Kyuubi didn't seem to have any ulterior motive, nor was it trying to manipulate him. It genially seemed like it was lecturing him, offering him advance in a time of need. It had taken Naruto a moment to reply to Kyuubi, and surprisingly, he felt Kyuubi paying rapt attention to what he had said. "I believe you, Kyuubi. But I still won't accept your deal. I don't need their acceptance. I don't need their approval. From now on, I'm doing things my way. They will always hold you back, Naruto. You won't be able to achieve your full potential. So long as people treat you as trash, you won't be able to grow. If your senseis now are neglective and useless, what makes you think they would accept you graduating? What makes you think your new sensei will be an improvement? Face it, boy, your future is looking bleak in the village." It was the first time Kyuubi had called him by his name, which showed he was truly serious about the situation. "What are you suggesting, Fox? Leave. You don't belong with these humans. Leave and become something more. Leave the village? What would I get from that? Kyuubi? Kyuubi?" Kyuubi chose to stay silent ever since. He given him his advice, and left him alone to ponder his situation. He had bid farewell to the Hokage, his mind in thought. That had been well over a month ago now. He still hadn't heard so much as a peep from the fox, no matter how hard he tried. Maybe he's right, he thought. It made sense. He had no guarantee that things would get better once he graduated. Furthermore, the Hokage was getting old. It wouldn't be long until he would finally pass on. What would happen to him then? Would his successor be as tolerant of him as the old man was? Based on his memory with that other bandaged old man, he already knew the answer, and he didn't like his odds. But, where will I go? What can I do? He snapped out of his thoughts when he was suddenly hit by someone. Both of them got knocked into the snowy floor. Naruto looked at the person, who had bumped and crashed into him. It was a young girl, probably his age. Surprisingly, she was even smaller than he was physically, so she might have been younger than he was. She was wearing a black full-length ceremonial kimono and nothing else over it, which was stupid considering she must have been freezing in the cold. Her hair was in a short Heim-style bowl cut that stopped just below her ears. Her eyes were pale milky white, stained with tears. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he asked. He got up from the snow and reached for her to help her stand. The girl shook her head, hiccuping and trying to wipe away the tears. When she was done, she took his offered hand and was pulled to her feet. "What are you doing out so late? Shouldn't you be at home?" The girl didn't answer, choosing to stay quiet. Naruto sighed, before deciding to help the girl. The girl probably panicked or had been punished, evident by the tears on her face. The least he could do was to help guide her back home. She seemed like a nice girl and definitely didn't harbor anything negative to him, which meant she probably had no idea who he was. "Come on, let's get you back home. Your parents are probably worried about you," he stated. The girl was still quiet, simply looking at him, before nodding and following him. They walked in the snow for a few more blocks, the girl quietly pointing directions which he didn't understand. She seemed to know where to go, so why had she been running in the opposite direction? Before finally reaching a huge compound. "This is where you live?" he asked. The girl nodded hesitantly. "Why would you leave your home, crying, if you lived in a place like this?" What he didn't know, however, was that even living in a castle can become a nightmare for its occupants. Especially the conditions she had been through prior. Being called useless for losing a spar against her younger sister, for what had seemed like the 100th time, the sensitive girl had run and not looked back. Before she could reply to his statement, someone dropped behind the girl. He was a man of average height, stoic face and long hair that was neat and straight. The man had the same eyes as the girl, indicating they were related. He was wearing the same style of kimono, but more masculine, with a black overcoat. "What do you think you're doing, Hinata? And why are you with that boy?" The man's tone was harsh as he addressed the girl, Hinata. He seemed like the strict, no bullshit strict, parent stereotype. Naruto did not envy the girl having to deal with him. Hinata flinched at the tone of her father's voice, before reluctantly letting go of the boy's warm hand. She had seen the boy around in the academy, but he was in a separate classroom than the one she was in, so she had never interacted with him. Not that she would, considering her meek personality. She didn't utter a single word as the man grabbed a hold of her hand, taking her with him. Looking back at the boy one last time, tears felt at the corner of her eyes. Naruto gave her what he thought to be a comforting smile, unable to do much as she was dragged away. It wasn't his business to interfere between family, and other than that, the man was strong. And he seemed to have some personal issue with him, that much he could tell from when he used his Sudama on the man. The usual anger was there, accompanied by a surprising emotion of jealousy, which made absolutely no sense to him. What did he have that made the man jealous? He sighed, before sticking his in his jacket's pocket. He hoped the girl wouldn't be hurt, and he wished he could have been able to help. The girl emanated a great deal of sadness. She didn't seem to have a much better life than he did. "It seems like everyone has their own baggage to deal with." He continued on his stroll in the night, before deciding it was time to go home and get some sleep. He had plans to work on. A week had passed since that incident. The academy was still closed, which gave Naruto the chance to continue training on his own at his frequent training ground. He was going through an upped version of his usual physical training. Since the weather was so cold and snowy, he had to put in double the effort to control his breathing, as well as his stamina. Surprisingly, the water walking exercise had also been a habit for him, since it helped his feet stay above the snow instead of sinking into the soft substance. It also had the added benefit of increasing his control over his reserve, and getting his body used to the effort needed to use it, making it more of an instinct than actual concentration. This had helped his control enough, that instead of 4 clones of the Bunshin Jutsu, he finally got controlled to make 3 only. Unfortunately, however, that had been a one-time thing. He hadn't been able to create only 3 since that attempt. Apparently, by practicing water walking, he had not only improved his control, but had also expanded his own reserves, which put him back in square one. He was still an 8-year-old, so his reserves were still growing, which meant that control would be more necessary than ever, but should be done in moderation so as to prevent his reserve from continuously growing. But at least, now he can walk on water for at least an entire hour without tiring, and without conscious effort. He doubted he would even need to water walk for more than an hour, so it was enough for him. Other than his physical skills, he had also advanced in his sealing. Fuinjutsu was truly a topic that he didn't regret looking into. He had reached an adept level of sealing, way after the beginner and apprentice level. He could now do a multitude of seals, such as exploding tags, electrifying tags, some barrier seal, weight seals and even some chakra absorbance seals. He had even learned to use one jutsu called the Fuinjutsu, Shikoku Fuin. It was basically a jutsu that allowed him to concentrate his chakra, and convert it into heat energy, which allowed him to inscribe his seals into any surface. The seal created would still require more blood and chakra channeled into it, but it allowed him to use seals without having to use ink or paper. It was a useful jutsu but not one he would use now. Ink and paper was far more available to him than to draw on walls. He did it on his own apartment walls, testing a few barrier seals which worked perfectly. He was even considering drawing seals on his body with it, but then reconsidered when he realized he would be in pain while doing it. He decided ink was still his better choice. He was, however, still far from the level of an expert, definitely further than a master like the Yondaime had been, but there was still time to get there. He was intent of improving himself as much as possible, and gathering as many resources as he could before leaving the village. Yes, he was still planning on following Kyuubi's advice and leaving the village behind. He had thought long about what Kyuubi said, and realized it was true. There was no use trying to convince the fools of the village. He also didn't owe them enough to keep trying. They never tried to look beyond the demon within, nor did they try to see him for who he really was. The way he saw it, if they didn't bother putting in the effort, then neither would he. Besides, it wasn't like he had anything in the village keeping him in. On the contrary, the village had more to gain by keeping him. The old man might have been someone to consider staying for, and so were the Ichirakus, but he knew they were better off without him. The ramen stand would probably prosper without his constant visits, and they would forget about him with time. The Hokage, on the other hand, was much more complicated. The man had been kind to him, in ways he had never experienced before. He knew that the man truly cared for him, maybe even loved him as his own grandchild, but he couldn't accept it. It wasn't enough for him, since deep down, he knew the man couldn't afford to get too attached to him. He was still the Hokage, and someday, Naruto would end up becoming nothing more than an asset to the village. He knew that to be true, because apparently that's what Jinchuriki were meant to be. They were meant to act as war deterrents, as army killers and secret weapons. Hashirama, the Shodem Hokage, might have distributed them to the other major villages as a sign of goodwill and equality, but he had been an idealistic idiot. Instead, the beasts were sealed in Jinchuriki and sent into the front lines. Or so he had read from a book he found in the library. The book was written by a man named Roshi, a shinobi from the village of Iwagakure. It certainly explained the harsh judgment of their Hokage, considering the man was from one of the villages that had the deepest of hate since the past shinobi war. So in the end, he decided that he had to leave to find his own way and life away from the village. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Konoha wouldn't want to lose their weapon, but he would find a way. He was crafty that way. He had been checking out the village gates, scouting which of the gates was the easiest to lead through. Each of the 4 gates had at least 2 gate guards, monitoring and logging each person passing through it. For shinobi, they would need a necessary scroll that proved their need to leave, and it had to be submitted for reference at the gate, with some exceptions. He also knew that there were more than jutsu too. At least a single team of hidden shinobi were present at each. He assumed they were Anbu shinobi. He hadn't been able to see them, but he could sense their existence, the same way he had been able to sense that Anbu team watching him for a while now. There was always a shinobi a distance away from him, but they did an amazing job hiding from him. If it hadn't been for his Sudama, he might have never realized they were there. They would even be present while he was in his apartment, watching over him from a nearby rooftop. They seemed to switch shifts, one different person every day, but they were there. None of them, however, seemed to harbor any kind of negative emotions, so he was fine with their presence, until that is, he had made his decision about leaving. That complicated things for him. After consideration, he found that his best option would be to use the eastern side gate. That gate was easily the quietest out of all the gates, having the least number of visitors per day. Not only that, but the guards at that gate were sort of, well, idiots. They spent most of the time bickering that he had seen a team once simply walk in through a gate, completely ignoring the guards. The Anbu hadn't stopped them, so they were official, but even they seemed amused by the 2 men's antics. He had even played a prank on them both, dropping a canister of purple paint on of the 2, and broke a beehive on the head of the other. Somehow, the 2 were convinced that other person was responsible for the prank and went into a full brawl. There was no way he could hide from the Anbu, but since they hadn't interfered, he figured they were amused as well. Mostly, however, the prank was done to mislead the Anbu following him into believing the prank had been the reason he had been watching the gate. The fact that even they didn't interfere, and seemed to have fun with the prank was good for him. He had even managed to catch sight of long purple hair, before the Anbu seemingly vanished from where she was. At least, he thought it was a she. Finally done with his exercises for the day, he decided to take a walk around, since he didn't quite feel tired yet. He took off in a random direction, opposite to the side of the village. He had never bothered to explore the area around the training fields before, never finding the need for it, but he figured he could do something different today. He kept moving through the forest, ignoring the animals bustling in the woods, watching him from a distance. The more he walked, the more the area seemed to grow quiet around him, until 15 minutes later he saw a weird sign posted on a high metal fence, at least 30 meters high. The sign had a crude drawing of a skull, with a "Do Not Enter" sign below. He wondered what was in there, before suddenly a shinobi appeared in front of him. It was an Anbu shinobi, evident by the armor and the animal-themed mask, a tiger mask. He had brown hair, and a katana sword over his right shoulder. He recognized the man, as one of those who were always keeping watch over him. This man in particular he had nicknamed Blank, since the man never seemed to actually have any particularly strong negative emotions. He felt them, but only barely. The purple-haired one, he named Purple, she usually felt annoyance. The other two, one felt like deep resentment, and the other just felt lazy. "Halt," he declared. "Training Ground 44 is off limits for anyone below the rank of Chunin and with special access or higher ranks. Please turn back and return to the village." "Ah, sorry, I was just walking around, and didn't know I was going anywhere. I will leave immediately," replied Naruto, offering the man a quick bow before turning and leaving. Training Ground 44, isn't that the one called the Forest of Death, that guy was talking about? He thought. He had heard about it from a passing genin. Apparently, there had been a recent Chunin exams hosted in the village, which was weird since he hadn't noticed any such event. He was probably busy at home with Fuinjutsu training or training in the training field. The genin had been part of the exam, and talking out loud about how dangerous the exams were, since they had to survive 5 days in that forest. He had described all manners of monsters, giant tigers, giant centipedes and basically other giant things. The most terrifying for him had been the spiders. He hadn't paid much attention after that, since he didn't believe there existed such giant monsters. But if the forest really was only for Chunin-level shinobi and higher, maybe there was some truth to what he had said. Not that it mattered much to him. His walk complete, he decided to head back home for the day. For some reason, he felt a foreboding feeling, like something was going to be happening soon. Something that would maybe give him the chance to get out undetected of the village. He already knew his plan after his escape. He planned on leaving the village and hiding out somewhere in the outskirts for a few days until the heat of his escape leveled out. Then he would make his way south. The closest country was to the south, and it was a land called Nami no Kuni, barely a day away with a shinobi's pace. He would resupply there, and then make his way east. Why east, you would ask? Because that was the direction of the abandoned Uzu Shiogakure and Uzu no Kuni. The ruined island would be a perfect place to keep working on his seals, and he might be able to gather some weapons and shinobi gear, provided they hadn't all rusted by then. Until then, however, he had to be ready. Somehow, Lady Luck always was on his side, as he would be getting his chance, but he never expected it to be the way it did. Several months later, night time. It had to be done. There was no other choice. For Shisui, for Sasuke, it had to be done. There was no other choice. For Shisui, for Sasuke, that was the only thought going his head. The only thing that helped him continue with his mission. The only thing keeping him going. The mantra kept looping time after time. He was left with that only choice. It had to be him. It had to be Itachi Uchiha, the heir to the Uchiha clan, the eldest son of Fugaku and Makoto Uchiha, the older brother of Sasuke Uchiha, Anbu operative at 10 years old, Anbu captain at 13, the youngest prodigy in the history of Konoha, comparable to the likes of Kakashi Hitaki, Kopi Ninja no Kakashi, and Minato Namikaze, Konoha no Kiroi Senko. Until that is, the Uchiha clan began to stage a coup d'état. The clan had been disdained at the treatment of the village, and the blatant disrespect to them as one of the founding clans. Due to suspicions of an Uchiha's interference being the cause of the Kyuubi attack, the village had turned against them. Itachi suspected, however, that it was the masked Uchiha's plan all along. The one who identified himself as Madara Uchiha. He had discovered the man once near the Naka shrine in Uchiha territory, and confronted him. Itachi made a deal with Madara, who seemed intent on having revenge against the Uchiha clan, and together, they had laid waste to the entire clan. Except for his younger brother. The one person he couldn't bring himself to kill. The one person he deemed worthy enough to cleanse the clan's name of its sins and start it anew. Sasuke would be the one to lead the Uchiha name to the light. But first, he had a few things to do before leaving the village once and for all. The Hokage needed to know, and a certain warhawk had to learn a lesson. Same time with Naruto. He hadn't seen what happened, but he had felt. The night sky had turned ominous, the shining moon bathing the land in its light. But all wasn't well. Fear and terror. That was all he could feel. Then suddenly, nothing. Emptiness. Death. Blood had been spilled. He didn't know who died, or even by who. But death was in the air, that much he was sure of. The sudden buzzing activity from the Anbu guarding him tonight, it was purple again, and her sudden departure somewhere unknown was clue enough. It was time. His chance. He didn't know when he would have another, so there was no time to waste. He quickly got up from his bed, and changed his clothes. Instead of his usual clothes, he wore a pair of navy Anbu pants, with a matching navy hoodie and a mesh shirt under it. His sandals remained the same, seeing as it was the standard wear. He also bought a new black backpack, replacing his usual camo green one. I need to be as incog, as unknown as possible. The word he was trying to use was simply far away from his half-awake adrenaline-rushed brain. Packing all of his stuff in the storage scrolls he stuffed them into his bag. He then took out his usual everyday clothes and kept them in hand. He knew that there were ways to track people. One of those ways was by using scent. If he could trick those trackers, he could possibly buy himself some extra time. Making sure he left nothing he needed behind, he made his way to the window. Opening it, he quickly jumped out, before hesitating and looking back at his apartment. He was going to do this. He was going to go and leave behind everything that he had had until this point. His empty apartment, the academy where he trained to become a shinobi. Looking out into the village in the direction of where he knew the ramen stand was, he thought of Ayame and Tucci. He was leaving without even saying goodbye. He couldn't afford it. He knew it was for the best, that they would be better off if he never returned to them, but somewhere deep inside he knew he was only lying to himself. Turning one last time, his eyes stopped on the large mountain with the heads of the previous Hokages, focusing on the third's head. The man would look for him, of that he had no doubt. He would try to get him back. And if he did, considering he had broken the Mont's trust by leaving in the first place, he was sure he would lose him forever. But he couldn't stay. Maybe, one day, when he was strong enough, he would return and see the old man. Until then, he had to do this. You are doing the right thing, boy. You don't belong here. You can trust me with that. Kyuubi's voice, sudden and somewhat unwelcomed at the moment, was still relieving. At least he had someone with him. His mind resolved, he made his way first to the south gate, the gate known to be the most bustling with activity and visiting merchants. Since his meeting with Kyuubi, he had realized some things about the beast. With his control over his Sudama, he had been able to sense the emotions of the beast within him. Hatred. It was definitely the strongest emotion he had. But it wasn't towards him, or aimed at someone specific. It seemed to be general, towards all of mankind. An ancient grudge that was kept in its being for a long time. He realized then that as much as Kyuubi acted superior, it still in some ways acted like a human. It hated, and since it felt that emotion, it meant that it cared. He didn't know why the beast hated humans yet, but from his own experience, he could relate to it. After all, even though he was a different person than Kyuubi, they were subject to the same emotions. They were both in the same seat. Trapped together, and forced to endure life's troubles together. With that, he decided, he and Kyuubi were different sides of the same coin. If there was anyone he could trust, it would be Kyuubi. Sure, it wanted to kill him, found pleasure in tormenting and ridiculing him, but they were together for the long haul. Unknown to him, his thoughts which he thought were private were broadcast loud and clear, and Kyuubi had heard them all. Naruto had accepted the Kyuubi's presence within him, which was something that no human other than one person had done before, but he didn't earn its respect yet. I guess he truly is your son, Kushina. But I still prefer him over you. At least he hadn't inherited those stupid, pain-in-the-ass chains that you had," noted Kyubi. Kushina had been the only human he interacted with except for a few ancient ones to acknowledge and accept Kyubi as a separate entity. She accepted him, and used that acceptance to keep him sealed and cornered, strengthening her resolve to keeping him sealed away. The others, Mito, Hashirama and the blasted Madara, had all simply treated him as though he was a mindless beast, best to be sealed away or used as they saw fit. While it acknowledged the boy as a better specimen than other normal humans, he knew things about the boy he himself didn't. He knew the truth about the boy, and he was doing his best to push him in the right direction. In order for the boy to truly achieve his destiny, he would have to die. The South Gate was finally in sight, and with it his actual goal. What he had noticed about this particular gate was that it had a constant stream of daily caravans. Merchants trading with other countries usually go through this particular gate, since the dirt road outside was the best between all the other exits. Late at sunset, merchants would pack up their merchandise, then go home for a final meal with their families and rest, before making their trips early morning. This was important to his plan, since by the time he was found missing, it should already be by noon, and he would already be a fair distance away. He approached the second-to-last wagon, making sure to stick to shadows so he's not seen by anyone. He crawled beneath it to its center axis and tied up the extra clothes he packed, making sure to let a part of the fabric extend to the dirt road, before making his way out. He repeated it 2 more times, tying his old clothes to other wagons. Ducking back down again, however, he caught sight of a flitting shadow on the floor. Probably a shinobi moving around. After using his Sudama to make sure no one was nearby, he quickly made his way out and to his destination. The East Gate. Having already been at the edge of the village, and with the shinobi occupied with another event at the other side of the village, he quickly reached the gate. Once again using his Sudama, he found only 2 gate guards at their post, and luckily for him it was the exact 2 guards he wished to see. He hanged himself into a normal black pet cat and made his way to the gate. Peeking in from the side of the booth, his cat face deadpanned, as he saw the 2 guards asleep, leaning on each other. Shaking his head, Cat Naruto kept moving forward and exited the gates. Once he was 100 feet or so away, he dropped the henge, and immediately jumped up on the nearest tree branch and began to make his way forward. He had to cover as much distance away as possible. They had been able to feast well. These humans tasted different, but better than usual ones. They tasted strong, juicy and far more energizing. They could feel themselves getting stronger with every corpse they consumed. Some of these humans had been strong, killing a few of their own, and wounding some more. There was no room for the weak. Those that were wounded also became prey. That was all they thought of. Food, prey and more food. Chomping on the heart of the human it had killed, covered in blood from the split-open ribcage and ignoring the squabbles of its fellow demons as they fought over a piece of a human's femur. They were demons that existed purely to destroy and consume humans. These humans, however, had proven to be powerful. They were able to attack with the elements, coat their weapons with an energy that was able to penetrate their thick hide, which wasn't supposed to happen. But in the end, they killed them and feasted on their flesh. They had reduced their herd, striking down their numbers. Now, there were only 4 of them left, but it didn't matter, for there were many more of them. Using the darkness of the night, they traversed this mysterious land and fed to their heart's consent. If they had any. Pausing in its meal, the demon raised its head and sniffed the air. The wind had brought to a new scent. And with this new scent was more to feed on. More flesh for them consume, more blood to spill. Chirping, and grabbing its herd's attention, it alerted them to new prey. Sniffing the air, they all began to salivate at the prospect of more food, and moved to stalk their next prey. He had no idea where he was now. He had been moving for almost an hour now at top speed, without using his chakra, making as much of a distance as he could. It was almost dawn, but still he knew he couldn't afford to stop now. So he pushed on, jumping through the trees as fast as he could. Stop, Naruto. He flinched at the unexpected noise in his head. Naruto immediately jumped on the next branch, crouching to steady himself. What's wrong, Kyubi? Why are you shouting? He asked. Listen carefully, boy. Use your senses. Can you feel what's coming? From the northwest, looking in the direction, Naruto used his Sudama sense and immediately flinched. It was something he had never ever sensed before. Vile, potent and strong, but most importantly, it reeked of hunger and death. And there were 4 of them. What is that? Those, boy, are demons. Creatures that roam the night, killing and feeding on the weak. For these things, anything that they can kill is prey. They won't hesitate to tear you apart and eat you. As you are now, you stand no chance of defeating them. You need to outrun them, or go back to the village and hope they haven't discovered your absence yet. I can't go back now, not when we're so close to getting away. He replied, not noticing the we he used, referring to himself and Kyubi, which the beast did note. How strong are they? Is there any way I can win? If you fight them face to face, you won't even last a minute. But maybe you can outsmart and outmaneuver them. From what I can tell, they are Asaruto demons. Meaning they are not as intelligent, but have high attack and maneuverability. You can't let a single hit graze you, or you'll be done for. Understood, he replied. He took his backpack off and reached into a couple of sealing tags from his sealing scroll. He released 10 exploding tags, 12 4-point seal tags, 10 breach seals and 4 electric trap seals. He had been hoping to keep these tags in case he had to create some distraction to avoid any shinobi on his tracks, but this was an emergency and he would make do with what he had. He also made sure to activate the secondary seal on each tag. The secondary seal was his idea to try to erase his tracks as much as possible, so any tag that he channeled his chakra into and activated would fizzle and self-destroy 3 hours after use. He had been doing this since he had been leaving some perimeter seals every now and then on the trees behind him. The seals would alert him if he had any followers within a 100-meter radius of the seal, no matter how far he was ahead. He had been able to improve the range jutsu because of this occasion. He knew he didn't have time. He began to prepare the seals to confront the demons when he felt it. One of the perimeter seals behind him had been activated. A fair distance back, 2 shinobi were racing in the trees, doing their best to catch up to their quarry and bring them back into the village for handling. They were wearing standard Konoha Anbu armor and shinobi masks that covered their face. However, unlike normal Anbu, their masks had the kanji "nei" on the top. Their mission had been to capture the Jinchuriki, using the Uchiha clan massacre as a distraction, for a meeting with their lord, Danzo. Danzo-sama would then speak to the Jinchuriki, and attempt to convince him to join Root out of their own volition, using the boy's own insecurities and neglect against him. They would then train the Jinchuriki according to their lord's wish, and turn him to the shield Konoha truly needed in the shadows, all while the boy would stay in the light and under the watchful eyes of the Hokage. However, when they had reached the Jinchuriki's apartment, they had discovered he wasn't there. Thankfully, however, one of the 2 was previously from the Yamanaka clan, and had therefore managed to sense the Jinchuriki's whereabouts. Seeing as he was out of the village, they immediately set out to retrieve it, knowing that failure would end with their death at the hands of Danzo-sama. While moving after him at top speed, surprised considering they still haven't managed to catch up to the 8-year-old, his partner reported that the Jinchuriki had stopped moving, and there seemed to be 4 other signature approaching his position. They didn't know if the 4 of allies to the Jinchuriki are enemies, but either way, they couldn't allow the Kyubi to leave the village. Damn it, I'm surrounded on both sides. The ones behind me are probably 10 minutes or so away. And the demons in front will be here even before. He thought. Okay, stay calm Naruto. I need to stay calm. He breathed in slowly, he exhaled, trying to think of a plan of action. Maybe I can get them closer to each other, and make them fight it out. If the 2 behind me are tracking me, it means they want me, and most likely alive. So if I make them fight each other, I can use them for protection while trying to get the demons. I can then maybe get them as well, he thought. With a plan in mind, he took out the kunai he had, the only one he had, that he had gotten from whoever helped him that day at the pond. Keeping it in hand, he set about preparing the traps. 3 minutes later, the demons finally arrived, emerging from the bushes like a pack of wolves, and immediately spotting him. They really looked disgusting. The demons resembled large, lizard-like creatures with oversized claws on their left hands. They wore a round shield on their right forearm, coated with evil enchantments to deflect most ranged attacks, and armor on their heads. They also had decorative frills around their heads. There were 4 of them just as he thought, their sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight, shining with the saliva that was dripping from their maws. Well, what are you waiting for? A buffet invite? He mocked them, before immediately running away. The demons gave chase, running after their prey. He quickly went towards one of his traps, a sealed tag placed on a tree. The second he went past it, chakra radiated from the seal, and it was ready to go. He quickly ducked behind another as one of the demons walked next to the tag, and activated it. It exploded into a huge blast of fire, burning the beast, and sending its burning body straight through another tree, completely shattering the tree trunk. The tree couldn't stand without its trunk, causing it to start falling down towards the demon. But as the monster rolled in the dirt, trying to extinguish its broken body, another sealed tag on a nearby tree was activated, sending an extensive paralyzing shock into its body, enough to make it stop moving for a second. The tree then fell, immediately crushed the beast under its weight. The other demons paid no mind to the death of their herd member, immediately charging towards the blonde. He quickly rolled out of the way, narrowly evading the claws of the pack leader, before getting up and running away again. This time, he channeled his chakra through him, using it to increase his speed. The beasts were still behind him, running on all fours. He then jumped into one of the higher tree branches around, putting his hand on the trunk, and activating his second trap. This one, however, had been far more complicated and fun to create. When he channeled his chakra into the seal, it lit up, creating a barrier to form on the floor, a pattern of seals spreading on the dirt from 4 stones that formed a square around the demons. With the barrier active, the second set of seals also went through. These were weight seals placed on the rocks. With the 2 seals active, the beasts immediately dropped to the floor, unable to move. Watching the events through his host's eyes, Kyubi was truly impressed. He used the barrier seals to create a barrier to lock a certain area on the floor, and then used weight seals to apply their effects on the area of the barrier. I really don't give this kid enough credit, that was truly ingenious, he thought. The boy may actually be able to beat the demons with his strategies. And it barely took him 2 minutes to prepare all this setup. Naruto grinned as he saw the demons fall into his trap. It had been an idea of his to train in a weighted down by creating the barrier and connecting it to the weight seals, but he had never tried to do it on himself, at least until he was sure it worked, since he wasn't sure he would be able to move to disable the weight. Grabbing a bunch of exploding tags, enough to hopefully kill them all, his plan was ruined by outside interference. The 2 shinobi had suddenly arrived, and stepped into the barrier. Instead of affecting them, the barrier ended fizzling out, unable to hold the chakra capacity of its 5 targets, thus releasing the demons. Instead of charging Naruto, the 3 demons immediately jumped at the new arrivals. Seeing the 2 sides trading blows, he decided to let them settle it between themselves, and continued hopping through the trees and away from the scene. Seeing the Jinchuriki, the first rude shinobi told his partner he would go after the boy, while he handled the monsters. He didn't wait for any confirmation, before sprinting after the boy, leaving his partner to deal with the 3 monsters. The mission always came first, and the Jinchuriki was much more valuable to lose. Naruto continued hopping through the trees, as he felt one of his shinobi pursuers go after him. Knowing that he couldn't escape him for long, he knew he had to set the field on his rules to deal with his pursuer. He soon saw an opening in the tree line, and what seemed to be an abandoned shrine. It was completely ruined and run down, but it at least gave an indoor advantage.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.